Kargil 1999, the time and place where the Indian Army shed their blood so that we could live with our head held high. A soldier at 19, an officer at 21, a martyr at 22. He died at the age of innocence in the season of spring, when flowers bloom and love blossoms, when the freshness of youth gives life and energy and vitality that only adolescence can have. He was an ordinary boy, born of ordinary parents in an ordinary village, an average student fond of movies who grew up playing games in Mohalla playgrounds. He prayed with his family on festive occasions. He loved his parents. He had many friends. He was an ordinary boy, and yet he died an extraordinary death. A death of valor, a death of bravery, a fearless, gallant, heroic death. He died for his country. He died for his people. He died for you and me. His story is what legends are made of. The 20th of February 1999. The Prime Minister of India embarked on a momentous voyage, a journey which would be long remembered as a defining moment in the history of the subcontinent. As this busload of goodwill raced down the Atari Vaga road towards the border, the distance between the two countries seemed to shrink. Atal Bihari Vajpayee carried the popular mandate of a peace-loving nation.
अपने समस्त देशवासियों की दुआएं और शुभकामनाएं मेरे साथ हैं, जो मुझे आज सीमा पार करते समय तथा अपनी पूरी यात्रा के दौरान प्रेरित करती रहेंगी.
On the other side, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif waited with his entire cabinet to welcome his neighbor. Even as the two prime ministers inspected the Pakistan military guard of honor, few people noticed the absence of the Pakistan Chief of Army Staff, General Pervez Musharraf, who had stayed away, citing his preoccupation with a minor foreign delegation. But there was no doubt that Sharif's welcome was warm, as he quoted the poetry of Vajpayee to make a point for peace.
दोनों को ही सहना है. 3 बार लड़ चुके. लड़ाई कितना महंगा सौदा है. रूसी बम हो या अमरीकी, खून एक सा बहना है. जो हम पर गुजरी बच्चों के संग न होने देंगे. हरी भरी धरती को खून रंग न होने देंगे. हम जंग न होने देंगे. हम जंग न होने देंगे.
Was Nawaz Sharif aware that his army had already initiated a massive infiltration exercise on the borders of India or not, is a question only history or Sharif can answer. The end of April 1999. While Vajpayee now heads a caretaker government in Delhi, the areas of Kargil are peaceful. Though at the receiving end of unprovoked and severe shelling in April and May 1998, during the holy month of Muharram, the predominantly Muslim population of Dras and Kargil are ready to receive 6 months of welcome summer. It is during this period that they trade, raise their crops and graze their sheep to meet the rigors of 6 months of cruel winter, during which the Zojila Pass is closed, snapping all road links to the rest of the country. Darchik. perhaps the only Aryan village in the world, celebrates the scents and smells of summer. The peace of this region is suddenly shattered on the 30th of April. The Indian Army has its first inkling of trouble. Indian air surveillance spots a Pakistan military helicopter carrying an underslung load. To military intelligence, this meant the chopper was not on a routine surveillance flight. A chopper with a large underbelly could only mean it was carrying substantial quantities of steel, or worse, it could be carrying a large dismantled gun. Even as the army was absorbing this information, 3 shepherds were grazing their flocks on the slopes of a hill in the Banjo area and the Baitalik sector. They noticed a group of men dressed in black scurrying off behind some rocks. Knowing the faces to be unfamiliar, they attempted to follow, but were dissuaded by a burst of small arm fire. One of the shepherds raced down to report the incident to the bridge guard at the Garkund village. The guard immediately took him to Lieutenant Colonel Anil Pandey, who was the officiating commanding officer of the 3 Punjab stationed there. Early the next morning, Lieutenant Colonel Pandey sent out a patrol led by Captain Gaur, with 1 junior commissioned officer and 10 Jawans, including 2 civil intelligence men of the 16 Grenadiers. The next day, on the 5th of May, Naib Subedar Sulakhan Singh led another patrol which reconfirmed the sightings.
I returned from my leave from Leh on 3rd of May, and when I returned here, and I came to know that one of the patrols from my unit, led by a JCO named Naib Subedar Sulakhan Singh, he had gone out just to confirm the presence of some unidentified people in the general area, this Banjo, which is behind this, and then again further behind this, far away from here. When this patrol reported to me on 5th that there is some movement they have seen on the higher ridges of Kokarthang, which is cannot be seen from here. It's again further, if this height you take this, double the height of this. So then the patrol went out of communication. So I just said ki, okay, if it has gone out of the communication and since the movement has been spotted, then I as an officer will have to be going, and then she also sent me there. Then we started climbing up. Then I chose my own route and we kept going up. We came under the mortar fire, that is indirect fire, and the artillery fire of the enemy. As we climbed up on the ridge line that is leading to Kokarthang top, from there then I could see a lot of movement, like some on the ridge line of the Kokarthang, some people were moving in the black dresses and some unidentified people, definitely not civilians. And then on to the Khalubar side, then on to Munthudalo, I saw a lot of movement, and then I kept passing with so and so strength I have seen, plus we are coming under fire.
Alarm now started spreading to the other units in Dras and Baitalik. On the 7th of May, Colonel Oberoi of the 16 Grenadiers sent out a patrol led by Major Surve, which was ambushed. Another patrol led by Major Rohit Gaur of the 10 Garhwal Rifles was also ambushed near the Jubbar Ridge. As reinforcements were rushed in, the brigade commanders realized that these were not isolated intrusions. By now, enemy presence had been detected in Mashko and Kaksar, as well as Dras and Baitalik. Corps Commander Lieutenant General Kishan Pal, the senior army commander in charge of the entire Kashmir area, rushed back to Srinagar from the bedside of his ailing wife in Pune to take personal charge of the operations. His first action was to move to Kargil to collate all available intelligence reports and plan a cohesive response.
The initial strategy was to get in contact with the enemy and contain him, as also carry out an accurate assessment of the extent and magnitude of this intrusion. By about 16th, 17th, the picture had started emerging. Prior to that, the way it unfolded, starting from 3rd May to 17th of May, it is not possible to assess as to what the magnitude would be. It is only once our troops gained contact and started reporting the presence of the enemy at various features, starting from Turtuk subsector, going all the way to Mashko, combined with the helicopter surveillance, that a larger picture emerged. By 17th, it was quite clear that it was a massive operation which undoubtedly was supported by Pakistan Army. Because of its artillery support, it became clear that it was an operation of large magnitude, great extent, and full support, which would not be possible to be planned, executed and sustained by the so-called Mujahideen. Its very nature revealed that it is a Pakistani army operation.
Kishanpal's boss, the GOC-in-chief Northern Command, Lieutenant General Khanna, soon followed him, flying in from Udhampur to monitor the situation. General Khanna decided to fly over the areas where intrusions had been reported. He got personal confirmation of enemy presence as his chopper was shot at by the intruders. Even as he returned safely to Srinagar, the Indian Army ammunition dump in Kargil was blown up in cross-border shelling by Pakistan. The mood in Srinagar was grim. Kishanpal realized that any effective response would require a massive troop movement through the Zojila Pass.
Normally, Zojila Pass is opened by about 15th of June. But this year, because of the operational situation, there was a necessity to open it early, and we pressed into service extra effort to make sure that this would not be a hindrance. And this, as we learned later on, came as a big shock to Pakistanis, because they had not anticipated that Zojila could be opened this early.
As the Zojila Pass opened, the Corps Commander started a massive build-up of troops. With new information coming in every few hours, the situation certainly looked very serious. Channels of communication were set up, intrusions were mapped out, with the army taking no chances as it moved to a war footing. Even as the 111 Gorkha and the 5 Para Commando were readying themselves for combat, Pakistan started a systematic bombing of the Srinagar-Leh highway and adjacent towns and villages. Panic-stricken citizens started streaming out of their homes and abandoning their villages. As the houses of the district magistrate and the superintendent of police in Kargil were damaged in heavy shelling. The Kargil TV tower was blown up, causing further demoralization. The defense minister arrived for a visit of the forward areas but was advised against going to Kargil. The situation was fast deteriorating as General Kishanpal moved the 8th Sikh into Dras to surround the base of Tiger Hill. Little did the brave Khalsa realize that they would remain at the base of Tiger Hill for the next 50 days before they would be able to conquer its heights.
With just about 2 days of acclimatization and hardly any special clothing, my battalion was launched on 15th May to clear Tiger Hill, point 4460 and point 4195. Point 4460 and point 4195 were cleared by 17th morning. However, on 18th morning, when an attempt was made to clear Tiger Hill from southern slopes, where you see 2 small patches of snow, the company came under very heavy fire. Another company, that is under Major Rathore, was applied in area Pariyon Ka Talab.
This is the Pariyon Ka Talab. As legend has it, banshees wail and dance on the frozen talab on moonlit nights. Brave young Lieutenant Kannad Bhattacharya went missing in this area on the 17th of May while attempting an assault on the hill from the northwestern direction. He was not to return alive. His body would be only discovered after the snow had melted and the Indian tricolour had reappeared atop of Tiger Hill. the village of Kaksar, surrounded by overpowering mountains. It was in these peaks and valleys on the 14th of May that desperate messages of the 4th Battalion of the Jat Regiment echoed, searching for a lost patrol. Earlier that day, Lieutenant Saurav Kalia had been sent out with an ill-fated 6-member team to occupy Bajrang Post.
The narrow valley which we see in front of us is the route which Saurav Kalia took to the glaciated areas on his way to Bajrang Post. Once the initial intrusions were detected in other areas, on the 14th of May, Lieutenant Saurav Kalia was tasked to lead a patrol. The patrol started in the morning, and well after midday we lost radio contact with the patrol.
When Saurav went missing and efforts to get in touch with him failed, then Lieutenant Amit Bhardwaj was tasked to take out a patrol and locate Saurav's missing patrol. Amit was immediate senior of Saurav, and as in the traditions in battalions, he was the one who was tasked to educate the youngster on the norms of the army life and on the traditions of the battalion.
Bhardwaj's patrol, it was a very strong patrol which had 30 strong bodies with it, and the basic task was to contact the patrol Saurabh, which was the first patrol that had gone, and this is the one which was to sort of retrieve it, but then it could not reach anywhere near to where Saurav Kalia had taken his surveillance patrol. This is basically because then the Pakistanis, the enemy did know that now naturally, since these people have been, let's say, fired upon or they have been captured or whatever it was, they sort of were ready for you. So a very heavy volume of fire from the direct and indirect firing weapons came onto this patrol, which was known as patrol Birdie. This came under fire and they couldn't reach anywhere. The officer, Bhardwaj, was injured. He sustained 2 bullet injuries. He, along with one Havaldar, Rajbir, they both, they took up position, though injured. The first one, that is Bhardwaj, took up position, kept on firing at the enemy, and ordered the patrol, you see, to extricate from there. And these two, they kept on giving the covering fire.
It was 62 days later, when the territory was recaptured, that the 2 mummified bodies were recovered close to Bajrang Post. Lieutenant Amit Bharadwaj was still holding his weapon in his hand, his finger pressing an empty trigger. The fate of Lieutenant Saurav Kalia and his men, however, came to light only on the 9th of June. Major Rahul Jain at Post 42 was to receive the bodies of Lieutenant Saurav Kalia and his team.
Well, this is where we live, and for a big guy like me, it becomes something like this. This place, there is no movement in the day for a simple reason. Both sides is waiting to take a pot shot, and there is absolutely no movement in the day. We generally move at night. Being very close to the LC, my closest post starts at about 20 meters. It is, and with the latest situation prevailing, both sides is waiting to take a shot at the other. So night is the best time to do all your jobs. Day we generally stick inside because we got snipers on both sides, and one shot is good enough to take a guy. Rest living in this bunker, because this bunker is got about 5.5 feet overhead, primarily to prevent any damage from arty fire or any of the heavier weapons. And over the time one has got used to it. We were told that they are handing over 6 bodies, that is one Lieutenant Kalia and 5 others, though they couldn't give us the names right, but we had a hunch it is them. I had gone to receive the bodies. When we got the bodies, we first tried to identify them. The first 2 bodies, we could still make out what the face looked like. The bodies had burnt marks, the eyes had been gouged out. In my hearts of hearts, a soldier doesn't do all this. At least a soldier cannot do all this if he's a soldier from the heart. The Saurav Kalia's body had been shot through the face, and actually the only way I could identify that body was because it had a gold chain around its neck, that it happens to be an officer. In fact, the people who came to identify also were not very sure. So I really can't put it into words how I felt during that time. Probably had the situation not been tense, I would have cut his throat.
An avid student of birds, Saurav Kalia's memory lingers on in the minds of his battalion of the Forge Art every time they look up at the sky to see a flock of birds flying away. In the next few days, the Prime Minister, the Home, Defence and Foreign Ministers were briefed by the Military Operations Directorate as the countdown to a formal conflict between India and Pakistan seemed inevitable. Indian Chief of Army Staff General Ved Prakash Malik toured the Dras, Kargil, Betalik sectors on the 23rd of May. The next day, he invited the Air Force Chief, Air Chief Marshal A.V. Tipnis, to join him at the Military Operations Directorate at the Army headquarters in Delhi. The Indian Air Force now placed 2 fighter squadrons on high alert for possible strike operations along the line of control. The next day, the 2 chiefs briefed the Cabinet Committee on Security. Later that day, Air Chief Marshal Tipnis travelled incognito to forward areas to prime the Indian Air Force strike base. On the 26th of May, the Prime Minister launched Operation Vijay. As dawn broke, MiG-23s, MiG-27s and Mi-17 helicopter gunships took off from airfields in Avantipur in Srinagar. Flying 30 missions on the same day, Operation Sagar, as the air operations were called, pounded the base camps of the enemy in Indian territory, marking the start of a bloody 50-day war, which would end with heavy casualties on both sides. A war which would make Kargil a household name in India. A war where the bravery of the Indian soldier would be etched in blood on those icy slopes for time immemorial. With the launch of Operation Vijay on the 26th of May, the conflict between India and Pakistan in Kargil had developed into what the Indian Prime Minister described was a warlike situation. Though the Indian ground forces had been engaged in a fierce battle with the intruders of the Pakistan army for the last 15 days, the launch of Operation Sagar by the Air Force added a very serious dimension to the conflict. The army had requested air support in the second week of May.
When this help was sought, my first reaction was, hooray, at last. We are not warmongers, but we certainly have donned this uniform to fight wars when the occasion arises. Nearly 30 years had passed since the Indian Air Force had been used in operations other than casualty evacuation, logistic support, and so forth. But no weapon had been fired in anger.
However, the armed forces and the political leadership were aware that inducting air power can have fairly serious repercussions.
When air power is used, escalation can be sudden and it can be to any dimension. To say that I will use air power to a limited extent does not mean the enemy will respond to the similar scale. The enemy could extend it to any extent, to an extent which it felt was necessary to meet its requirements. I think initially the army felt that you could contain the intrusions, because now it is well known that I think the extent of the crossing by the Pakistanis across the line of control was not fully appreciated in its initial stages. But when they found the going rough, I think jointly we concluded that we had to in fact use air power and use it the way that it needed to be used. And therefore you got the political clearance for it.
Once government clearance was given on the 25th of May, the Air Force was raring to go. The Air Chief toured the theatre of operations incognito to activate his strike bases and prepare them to face any eventuality.
I wanted to keep my movement as confidential as possible. In fact, I wanted to make sure that I went incognito.
Whatever else it also achieved, the Chief's visit was really a morale booster to the young air officers.
When one day my commanding officer came in and he told, Pom, let's go for a briefing. And I went with him, and he took me, instead of the briefing hall, to a helicopter. The helicopter was started up, and I saw the air officer commanding of Srinagar driving down his vehicle. I saw a person getting down from the gypsy who looked very much like the Chief of Air Staff, but he was not wearing his rank badges, neither was wearing any name tab. He was wearing a cap, and I was not very sure. He looked like my chief, but well, chief never arrives like this. As the helicopter started, one officer was standing next to the cockpit. He told me, Chief of Air Staff wants you inside the cockpit, and it was a shock for me. I went inside. Chief told me to sit down next to him, and he told me that I want you to show me the targets. I want you to assess, because you are the boys who are going to fight. Till now I was hearing that, well, Air Force might be called in, but now you're hearing from the horse's mouth.
The very next day, airstrikes were launched in Dras.
We used MiG-21, MiG-23, MiG-27, MiG-29 aircraft and the Mi-17 helicopter in our offensive action. Initially, the targets were Tiger Hill, the Tololing feature and the Munto Dhalo area, where a supply camp of the enemy was there. On 27th of May, one of the aircraft, while carrying out the attacks, a MiG-27 aircraft flown by Flight Lieutenant Nachiketa, developed engine problems while in the Batalik sector and he had to eject.
Nachiketa's aircraft crashed into the mountains even as he ejected into enemy-occupied Indian territory.
And I saw about 6 to 8 people running towards me from a northeasterly direction about a kilometer away. About 250 odd meters away, I saw some huge rocks and boulders and I took the cover behind them. As I was recovering my breath, this was the time I realized somebody shouting in Hindi. Bahar aa jao, aapke hi log hain, these kind of things. As I peeped behind from one of the rocks, I could see about 6 men, all with Pathan features. And they had formed a kind of a semicircle in front of me and they were rushing up the valley and they were firing. I presume they were firing AK-47s. The closest Pathan had come on top of me and he shoved the barrel of his AK-47 into my mouth. The next few seconds were actually very long. I was looking into his eyes and at the trigger finger, that's all. Because the eyes would have given me the small indication of a trigger press. Fortunately for me, that never came. And meanwhile, the other 5 people had come. Somebody snatched the gun from my hand. Somebody else started taking off all the documents. Somebody was searching my body for any more weapons. In the next few minutes, things happened very fast. There was physical abuse and I could make out by the tone of their language, a mix of Pashto and Urdu, that they were not very happy with me. Fortunately for me, in about a few minutes, one officer arrived on the scene. He was a captain of the Pakistan Army and the first English words which I heard were, "You could have killed one of my men." And then there was a long pause. I presume he was deliberating as to what he should do with me. By and large, this stay was cordial, but for a few minor incidents. One of them was when they were carrying out a video filming and they wanted me to pass a message for my parents and my family. I kept saying, I kept refusing to talk. I didn't want to talk anything. Finally, in frustration, after a few minutes, I said one small message and I said, "Mera Bharat Mahan." People didn't like it very much and I had a tough time after this.
For the next few days, Nachiketa was moved from place to place. He was interrogated, threatened, blackmailed, manhandled, physically and emotionally bruised. He was handed back in what the Pakistanis called a goodwill gesture. After returning from this nightmare, perhaps Nachiketa's only fond memory would be of the young Pakistani captain who had saved his life.
Another very interesting incident which happened was the time after I landed and I spent about 2 to 3 hours with this young army captain, Captain Kamar. Somehow I developed a very warm rapport with him and I was able to converse in a very friendly manner, partly because I realized that he saved my life at that stage and partly because he was a very level-headed chap. He told me that he's been married a month back and that he should have been on his honeymoon. Instead, he was spending the time sitting here at 17,500 feet waiting for his death. While going, I had wished him all the best, and when I came back to India, I was actually inclined to write a letter to him through the proper channels. However, unfortunately, I came to know later that on the 4th of June, he was killed carrying out the operations from their side.
The other memory that would haunt Nachiketa would be that of squadron leader Ajay Ahuja.
Squadron leader Ahuja, who was flying a MiG-21 aircraft, went to search for Flight Lieutenant Nachiketa's aircraft and for Flight Lieutenant Nachiketa, and in the process of search, his aircraft was brought down by a surface-to-air missile. Unfortunately, Squadron leader Ahuja was, though he had ejected safely, his body was returned to us 28 and it had bullet wounds. We had sent a person across to post 43, I think it was, and there the body was identified and brought to Srinagar.
43 has been the post where the dead bodies have been exchanged. The first body which we got was of Squadron leader Ahuja. It started in the morning. They told us that they'll be handing over the body. The time was about 1300 when they were supposed to. They delayed it for their reasons best known to them. At about 1630 they came with the body, plus there was 6,090 rupees in Indian currency which was found on Squadron leader Ahuja. He was in his overalls and I checked the body it had bullet wounds, and then we took it.
On the 28th of May, when a Mi-17 specially configured to fire rockets was shot down by a surface-to-air missile, the Air Force went into a rethink of their approach. Even as the Air Force were reviewing their strategy, the Indian Army entered its second week of operations. However, the extent of intrusions was still hazy. It would take till the third week of June to get a clear picture of the entire scope of Pakistan's operation, codenamed Badr.
He had very large designs. It was not merely blocking the Srinagar-Zojila highway. I think he was aiming at seeking a revenge for Siachen operations, seeking a revenge against us for 71 operations. They wanted to occupy large chunks of territory and as also cut off Ladakh region completely, and thus make it very difficult for us to hold not only the Siachen areas or Kargil areas, but perhaps the complete Ladakh region, and merge it with the northern areas of theirs.
As patrols went out, new intrusions were discovered nearly every day. It was becoming clear to all concerned that those holding the heights were no well-armed militants. The volume and intensity of their firepower and artillery support made it clear that they were a regular, well-trained army with substantial administrative and logistical support. In those first few days, the foot soldier paid a heavy price making that discovery. In the second week of May, the 70 Infantry Brigade under Brigadier Devinder Singh had been moved to take over the Baitalik sector.
A 70 Infantry Brigade moved into the Batalik Yaldor sector on the 8th of May, once the intrusion had been detected. There were a number of patrols out, and over the next 2 days, these patrols were recovered and the information they had was also processed. 2 of these patrols got ambushed. One of them was of Rohit Kaur. The peculiarities of the sector are that firstly, it's got the highest heights. They all range in the area of in the range of about 5,200, 5,300, and maybe up to 5,600. Secondly, this area is away from the road. If you have to move into this area, it's all on man-pack basis, and therefore it makes that much of logistics difficult. Thirdly, this area had been unoccupied, though we were patrolling it regularly, but by convention or by norms, this was not occupied on the LC, and therefore the terrain knowledge with us was that much limited, as also with the enemy also.
One of the patrols which was to provide very useful inputs at this stage was led by Captain Sangwan of the 16 Grenadiers.
Sangwan's patrol was there in the area of Yaldor. Yaldor is a nala which is going up right up to the LC. He had gone in, and while returning, he had gone in onto area known as the Spring, and while returning from there, he was ambushed, and also of great presence of mind. He extricated most of his personnel from there, and we managed to establish contact with him about 3 to 4 hours after his ambush, and within the next 24 hours we did manage to recover most of his casualties.
Sangwan was to remain there for 3 weeks. From there he would be sent to occupy the ridgeline of the Three Pimple area, where he was to witness one of the fiercest battles of the 50-day war. It was here, when Sangwan was moving with his men to occupy a post vacated by the enemy, that he had his leg blown up in a mine blast.
I was told by my senior officers that you may find some resistance also there, though we have already cleared that area, and further operations are to be launched from my position the next day. Pakistani, before retrieving, they had thrown these plastic minefields, and I stepped onto the mine, and with a big explosion I lost my leg. Regrets? In fact, the day when we are putting on a uniform, that day we already promised our complete body, everything to the nation, for the nation. In fact, I am not happy because only a small part of my body has gone, but still my complete body is left. So those idiot Pakistanis, they just taken a small part.
In these early days, another tragic patrol that went out was led by Captain Hanifuddin of the 11 Rajputana Rifles.
First I met Hanifuddin in Jaipur, that was in 1997 when he joined the battalion. And he was a very jovial character, very fond of music. On 6th of June 1999, Captain Hanif and myself, both of us, we were tasked to go to a place from different axes. The last words which he spoke to me, they were like, I said, Hanif, be careful. And how are you? He said, sir, maje aa rahe hain and don't worry, I'll take care of myself. Captain Hanif, he got a burst of HMG in his, under his right breast.
It was to be 6 weeks later when the bodies of this brave warrior and his comrades, Rifleman Parvez and Nayab Subedar Mangej Singh, would be extricated. शहीदों के मज़ारों पर लगेंगे हर बरस मेले, वतन पे मरने वालों का यही बाकी निशान होगा. Dalai Lama means different things to different people. Yeshan, Nobu, to some it means a living Buddha, the Bodhisattva of compassion. To others it means a God King. It was to him that Sonam Wangchuk went for blessings when he received his marching orders on the 26th of May.
I being quite religious, and otherwise also all the boys, they are quite religious and they have this element in them. So they said, in fact, it would be very nice in case they can have a darshan of Dalai Lama. We went there, had his darshan, and after that we came back.
Major Sonam Wangchuk and his boys of the Ladakh Scouts repelled a Pakistani offensive in the Chor Patla sector, which, if successful, would have seen a massive infiltration of 600 to 700 enemy troops from areas across the LOC.
A group of them, 5 to 6, had entered on our own side of the LC, and that is the time when they were ambushed by our boys, Ladakh Squad boys, that is Sonam Wangchuk and party. They were fired upon. They lost 3 to 4 of their comrades, and then they rushed back, leaving their weapons in our area. And these were the initial catches that we had: 3 dead enemy, and 2 MMGs, and 1 UMG.
As a tribute to this brave effort, the 2 peaks in the area were named Sonam 1 and Sonam 2. And now by the end of May, the troops of the 1 Bihar regiment were relieving the 3 Punjab, 111 Gorkha and Ladakh Scouts in areas at Banju, Point 4624 and the Markuto Ridge. On the 27th of May, Captain Revti Bhandari of the 1 Bihar had captured a forward locality and named it Madhuri Post after film star Madhuri Dixit. And now by the end of May, the troops of the 1 Bihar regiment were relieving the 3 Punjab, 111 Gorkha and Ladakh Scouts in areas at Banju, Point 4624 and the This brave son of India was commissioned into the Bihar regiment on the 11th of March 1995 from OTA Chennai.
In our group, he was the senior most. So he always used to teach us all these things. Don't worry, daro mat, just go ahead. If you'll think about it, you'll get more worried about your parents. You'll get more that fear will come in. So don't think about it. Just go ahead. Our camp was attacked by militants, and that was the first time I faced bullets, basically live bullets.
And to be very frank with you, that day I was shivering. Like when you see bullet flying, like when you can hear it, when you can see a person firing on you, you really feel like initially you feel that fear is there. And that day it's my confession that I was shivering that day. That was the first time I faced live bullet. And I saw this chap that day, and he was like just walking towards the bullet. Like, kahan se aa raha hai? And I'm shouting. I was on the cover. I'm shouting, Sabi sir, bulletproof pehno sir, bulletproof pehno sir. Bolta hai, chup rahe, dekhne de mujhe. And he's just walking ahead. Kahan se aa raha fire? Kahan se aa raha? And whenever after fighting this battle, I also came to know that swearing is very much important. Whenever you go in for war, swearing is very much important. One has to swear. बिना गाली के काम नहीं होता है, ठीक है ना? And whenever this thing used to happen, he used to swear a lot. कहाँ से आ रहा fire and all those things, and he used to go ahead. And मैं बोलता था, that day everything got cool, everything was okay. We have got a nickname. So his nickname was Changiz or Sayyid. We used to call him Sayyid also because his name starts from S. So we used to call him Sayyid also. And he was a Charlie company commander. We used to call him Changiz also. Changiz was more popular. Changiz. On 28th of May, he was told to capture 4268. At around 2100 hours, he moved from that location. And since the objective was far off, so he got daylighted. Around 5:30, we heard an RL, firing of an RL, rocket launcher. Then, as I told you, I asked him, sir, do you want any reinforcement? Because it was already daylighted. Then he told me, don't worry, Tiger, like, don't worry, I am everything under control and just keep watching the fun. It was around 6:30 when we got the message that he got a ricochet on his head and it was bleeding. So CO called him and asked him what happened. So he said, nothing sir, one bullet had come and its ricochet had hit my head and it's bleeding sir. So bolta hai, anything serious? CO asked him, anything serious? Bolta, no sir, nothing serious. It's all under control. So later on we came to know that he had got a bullet injury on his head, and with his patka, he was wearing a black patka that day, which he used to wear, black patka, and he just tied it up. And he said, Jawan was telling me later on that he said ki aaj Changiz ko koi nahi ro sakta.
Changiz was stopped that night. 3 bullets through the head even as he won a posthumous Veer Chakra, defending the slopes of Baitalik. By now nearly a month had passed since the intrusions were first reported, but the army was still on the defensive. Information was still sketchy. Body bags were increasing. Casualties were mounting, even as Operation Vijay was painfully moving into its second week.
मारोती है उसको कोई किस तरह संभाले, आँखों के दिए बुझ गए ऐ गोद के पाले, सरहद पे ना जाने दी, ऐसे जियाले।
Even as Operation Vijay entered its second week, Moscow was the first to support India's action. The United Nations ruled out the possibility of sending a special envoy to India and Pakistan. In the US, the State Department denying Pakistan's claim to the contrary were quoted as saying, "To our knowledge, India has not struck over the line of control either deliberately or accidentally." In Delhi, Defence Minister George Fernandez briefed leaders of the opposition and the allies, gaining their support for the government's course of action. In the arena of operations, consistent Pakistani shelling had reduced Dras to a ghost town as only 52 civilians remained. The only hospital had been destroyed and the doctors had moved to Leh. Even before the launch of Operation Vijay, Lieutenant General Kishan Pal had realized that the 3 div of General Budvar would be insufficient to combat the enemy, spread over 196 kilometers along the LC. Budvar had moved his TAC headquarters from Leh to Kargil, deploying the 70 Infantry Brigade under Devinder Singh in Baitalik, while Brigadier Kakkar and his brigade were deployed in Turtuk.
By 16th, 17th, I had made up my mind that it will be the 8th div which will come. General Puri, who was away from his formation for a few days, rejoined them on 16th of May. And in fact, soon after coming, he had volunteered and he had said that this operational task, other side of Zojila, should be given to him. And I had no doubt in my mind that it will be one of my formations, that is the 8th Division, which is a battle-hardened formation, which was there in the valley, would be moved, and that is why I had moved 56th Brigade, which was part of this division. It took a little while. By the time the decision was finalized at various levels, and ultimately by 29th they were in position, and 1st June they had taken operational charge of this sector.
8th Mountain Division, of which I happened to be the General Officer Commanding, was tasked to look after the counter-insurgency in northern Kashmir. I had my headquarters at Sharifabad, and my brigades were deployed all over northern Kashmir. Somewhere around 28th of May, I was called up by the corps commander and given the task of restoring the situation in the Dras and the Mashko sectors. And I was to assume control over this area from 1st of June. Well, we moved our headquarters, the tactical headquarters, which comprised a very small staff and myself, and we came to a place called Matyam, which is very close to, say, about between Dras and Zojila. And we established our tactical headquarters there.
From Matayan, Puri and his 8th Mountain Division controlled 3 brigades. Amaral's brigade, which was responsible for Dras, including Tololing and Point 5140. 192 Mountain Brigade, commanded by Brigadier Bajwa, which was brought in for the capture of Tiger Hill. And Brigadier Kakkar with the 79 Brigade, which was tasked to contain the enemy in Mashko. Puri's TAC headquarters in Matayan started working immediately under his Colonel GS Colonel Chabewal.
The tactical headquarters really is the hub of all our activity which is happening in the division during the operations. We have our communications with our forward troops on telephones, on radio sets. We are in constant touch with each other. On our maps we know as to where what is happening. We plot the movements of our troops. We know where the enemy is, what his intentions are, what is he intending to do. So really speaking, this place is the nerve center of all activities during the operations. We get information, we issue directions, and based on that, the troops in combat implement those orders, and consequently, operations keep progressing.
The priority of the army was very clearly the eviction of the enemy in Dras. This formidable task was given to General Mohinder Puri.
The task which the corps commander gave me were twofold. Firstly, to evict the Pakistanis from our area and push them back across the line of control. And the second, which was of immediate consequence, was to eliminate all observation over the National Highway 1 Alpha. which passes through Dras coming from the Zojila side. Comes from Zojila, comes to Dras and then on to Kargil and Leh. So the area which was falling within my area of sector of responsibility was something which I had to clear from the enemy domination. And so we set about our task of the first important feature. If you're in Dras, the first important feature which you see is a place called Tololing. Now Tololing is about 4,500 meters, which roughly is about 15,000 feet. And the enemy was sitting there. He had excellent observation over the Dras Valley. And he was in a position to interdict all traffic on the Dras-Kargil road. And this was it was a very important objective for us because we wanted to clear it and we wanted to take our time to prepare so that we were ensured of 100% success.
This arid mountain had never been heard of before. But in the next few weeks, it was to become a household name in India, its significance being recorded in blood by the brave soldiers of the 2 Rajputana rifles and the 18 Grenadiers. The 18 Grenadiers, or Grinders, were inducted into Dras in the 3rd week of May. Brought out of CI Ops, where they were battling insurgency in the Kashmir Valley, this Polestar battalion prepared to battle wind, rain and snow, climbing a rocky, inhospitable terrain at night to engage an unknown enemy at 15,000 feet.
जो टेरेन था ये बहुत ही मुश्किल टेरेन था। जैसे कि आप देख रहे हैं बहुत ऊंची ऊंची चोटियां हैं और पथरीली चोटियां हैं और तकरीबन जो हाइट है वो तकरीबन 15,000 और 16,000 फीट की ऊंचाई पर ये चोटियां हैं। और जैसे कि आप देखेंगे कितने मुश्किल पहाड़ियाँ और पत्थर हैं जिनके ऊपर बिना रॉक क्लाइंबिंग के चढ़ना काफ़ी मुश्किल है। और ये ऑपरेशन तकरीबन हमने 22 दिन किया। इस ऑपरेशन के दौरान तकरीबन रोज़ाना काफ़ी बारिश, मौसम ख़राब रहता था, भारी बर्फ़ पड़ती रहती थी और टेम्परेचर जो था काफ़ी डाउन था। और शुरू में तो जब हम लोग यहाँ आए थोड़ा समय कम मिलने की वजह से ट्रुप्स भी पूरी तरह एक्लेमेटाइज नहीं हो पाए थे, लेकिन एक बार जब लड़ाई शुरू हुई तो ट्रुप्स जो है अपने आप एक्लेमेटाइज हो गए हैं।
Having established an administrative base at Bimbat under his adjutant Major Rajiv Kumar, Thakur moved out with his men to surround Tololing. His sister company, the 16 Grenadiers, had been holding observation posts and a firm base 3 kilometers from the top. Thakur met Colonel Thapa and Major Ajit at this base to share whatever little information they had. While the next few days were spent in reconnaissance and planning, the nights were spent in relentless forays up the hill to assess the strength of the enemy. Slowly it was becoming painfully clear to Thakur and his second-in-command, Colonel Vishwanathan, that the briefings they had been given had grossly misjudged the enemy. Those holding the heights were not a few well-armed militants. They were indeed a well-trained army, and an army that was well entrenched not only on the heights, but in all the routes to the top as well. Stone sangars had been built on point 4590 in the Barbad bunker area before the top. They were also entrenched on heights behind the feature, on the hump, in the saddle, and on 5140, the highest point in the area. From here, not only could they target the highway, they could sit back and shoot down at leisure any company that attacked. Thakur first sent one of his bravest officers, Major Rajesh Adhikari, to the headquarters of the 56th Mountain Brigade to engage the enemy from the air in helicopter attacks. On the 24th of May, a Cheetah helicopter mounted with a medium machine gun flew over Tololing but was unable to provide effective fire.
I was flying late, Major Adhikari, for Ranjit operation on Tololing. Now, this was the first kind of we modify our Heptas, fit MMGs to engage, moving enemy in open. So Rajesh, I picked up Rajesh from Dras to engage Pakis over hump area and 5140. We went up to 17,000 feet, the doors were removed. It was minus 15 degrees at 17,000 feet. I told Rajesh Adhikari, we saw about 5 to 6 Pakis moving from 5140 towards hump side. So in that josh, I told Adhikari, shoot them, just kill them. He fired a burst of about 10 to 15 rounds and the MMG stopped. I kept telling him, kill them, shoot them. I started descending towards the enemy. But Rajesh Adhikari told me, sir, my hands are frozen, I can't operate this trigger anymore. Now it is sad to say the next day, or I think day after that, Rajesh left us in an attack, and I feel great to have Rajesh on board and did that mission over Tololing.
On the 26th of May, Major Adhikari guided a Mi-17 helicopter over Tololing, only to discover that the enemy had built sangars on the reverse slopes of the hill as well as on the top. When facing aerial fire, they would slip into the sangars on the reverse slope, which were effectively protected from air assaults. And when on the 28th of May, a Mi-17 was brought down by an enemy surface-to-air Stinger missile fired from point 5140, the chopper assaults were stopped. With insufficient artillery support at this stage, Thakur realized the impossible position he was in. Born in this battalion in 1976 as a young second lieutenant, Colonel Kushal Thakur had grown up to be its commanding officer. The men he was leading had known him for 23 long years. They had grown to love him, respect him and admire him. They had worked together, played together, grown as a family. And now, with all odds against them, Thakur had to motivate these men to fight, to kill, to die for their country, for their army, for their culture.
लड़ाई शुरू होने से पहले मैंने अपने जवानों को सिर्फ 3 बातें बताई। सबसे पहली कि बड़े सौभाग्य की बात है कि हमें लड़ाई के मैदान में उतरने का मौका मिला है और हर एक सिपाही की ज़िंदगी में ये सबसे बड़ा सपना होता है जो कि आज पूरा हुआ है। दूसरी बात, लड़ाई के मैदान में मैं तुम्हारे साथ सबसे आगे आऊँगा बिना हथियार के, और मेरे पास सिर्फ ये वॉकिंग स्टिक रहेगी, और तुम्हें मैं ऐसे खतरे में नहीं डालूँगा जिसे मैं खुद नहीं कर सकता हूँ। और आखिरी बात, मैंने उन्हें कहा, इस पूरे ऑपरेशन में हमारा नारा रहेगा विजय या वीर गति। या तो हम विजय हासिल करेंगे या वीर गति को प्राप्त होंगे।
In the next few days, they would stare death in the face, remain without food and water, shed their blood, but return with their heads held high. Major Rajesh Adhikari, Captain Nimbalkar and Lieutenant Balwan planned their final assault. Even as Adhikari was leaving, he received a letter from home which had been sent up with supplies from the base. Instead of reading the letter, Adhikari stuffed it into his pocket and prepared to leave. When asked to read his letter before he went up, Adhikari retorted, "The letter is from Kiran, my wife. I know what will be written. The 7th of June is my first wedding anniversary and she wants me to spend it with her. Now how do I explain to her that I can't get leave? Time is running out. I'll read the letter when I get to the top. The suspense will keep me going." For 48 hours, Adhikari and his brave men fought their way up inch by perilous inch, attacking the enemy in 2 columns. Adhikari reached nearly 30 yards from the Barbad bunker when the enemy opened fire from 2 mutually supported UMGs.
मेजर राजेश अधिकारी एक बहुत ही बहादुर ऑफिसर और उससे बढ़कर एक निहायत ही अच्छे इंसान थे। ये मैकेनाइज इन्फेंट्री के ऑफिसर्स थे जो मेरे साथ 1 साल की अटैचमेंट में मेरे साथ थे, और ये अटैचमेंट 24 जून को ख़त्म होने वाली थी, जबकि ये बीच में लड़ाई चल पड़ी। ये बात है 28-29 मई की। और सबसे बड़ी बात जो इनमें मैंने देखी, वो कोई भी काम मैंने दिया, इन्होंने हमेशा इस काम के लिए वॉलंटियर किया, अपने आप सबसे आगे किया। जब इनको मैंने ये टास्क दिया कि आप तोलोलिंग पे कब्जा करोगे, हमला करेंगे, ये खुद कंपनी के सबसे आगे थे। और हमले में जब तकरीबन बर्बाद बंकर के पास बिल्कुल पहुंचने वाले थे, आखिरी बंकर था, उससे पहले इन्होंने बाकी बंकर कब्जे में कर लिए थे। इनको गोली लग गई वहाँ पे और ये घायल हो गए और मेरा इनसे रेडियो सेट पे मिलाप टूट गया। और जो इनका रेडियो ऑपरेटर था लांस नायक राजेंद्र, वो मेरे साथ रेडियो सेट पे आया कि साहब को गोली लग चुकी है और काफ़ी गंभीर रूप से घायल हैं और बहुत इतना फायर है कि हम बाएं या दाएं या किसी भी तरफ मुड़ नहीं सकते, और बल्कि मैं भी उनके पास नहीं जा सकता, क्योंकि मैं हर बार उनको कह रहा था मेरी उनसे बात कराइए। तो कह रहा साहब कि हम जहाँ पे भी पिन डाउन हुए वहाँ से हम निकल नहीं सकते हैं। और बड़ी अजीबोगरीब बात एक बार फिर हुई कि जब वो ऑपरेटर मेरे से बात कर रहा था और बात करते करते वो बहुत ज़ोर से चलाया, क्योंकि उसे भी मेरे से बात करते करते गोली लग गई और वहीं दम तोड़ गया।
Adhikari never made it back for his first wedding anniversary. When the body was finally recovered on the 13th of June, Kiran's letter was found in Rajesh's pocket, still unopened. This brave officer was awarded a Mahavir Chakra by a grateful nation. In the next few days after Rajesh's death, the grenadiers consolidated their position on the hill. They built up stocks of ammunition while Thakur and Vishwanathan built up their morale. Under constant threat of sniper attacks and enemy shelling, these soldiers lived in the open, crouched behind rocks. Tea was a luxury. Food would take 24 hours to reach them and would be barely edible. While holding positions on the hill, they received letters from home, sent messages back through the base. Some, like Vishwanathan, even found time for a little prayer.
जो कर्नल विश्वनाथन साहब आज हमारे बीच नहीं हैं, और वो एक देवता इंसान थे और पूजा पाठ में, भक्ति में उनका बहुत ज़्यादा मन लग गया था। तो वो लास्ट टाइम में भी नीचे से बोले, हवलदार लीलाराम आप मेरे लिए थोड़ा अगरबत्ती वगैरह भेजना, ऊपर मैं थोड़ा धूप बत्ती करूँगा। तो मैंने उनके लिए नीचे से प्रोवाइड की और ऊपर भिजवाई।
On the 2nd of June, another plan was formulated to launch an assault on point 4590 and the Tololing top from the southern approach. Massive covering fire was to be given from the southeastern and southwestern spurs. Heavy artillery fire commenced from 8:30 p.m. that evening and continued till midnight in an attempt to soften up the enemy. What was remarkable about this assault that it was not led by a company commander but by the commanding officer, Colonel Kushal Thakur, and his second in command, Lieutenant Colonel Ramakrishnan Vishwanathan. Earlier that day, Vishwanathan had requested his CO to let him lead the assault. As per convention, a commanding officer should always remain 2 companies behind an assault. Thakur had refused, saying, "How can I send my men into this kind of danger unless I'm willing to lead them there myself?" The assault started at 1 a.m. By 2 a.m., Vishwanathan had blown up 2 enemy Sangars in his charge to the top. Thakur, codenamed Akbar, lost his radio operator and was attempting to reach Vishwanathan, codenamed Kerala, on his radio set. Vishu's radio operator informed Thakur that the 2IC was attempting to blow up the 3rd enemy position and was at present engaged in a hand-to-hand combat with the enemy. This brave Lieutenant Colonel destroyed 3 enemy Sangars, killed 4 of the enemy in close combat, finally succumbed to his injuries, winning a posthumous Veer Chakra. becoming the senior most officer to die in the Kargil conflict.
लड़ाई में काफ़ी सारे नाजुक मोड़ आते हैं। ऐसा लगता है शायद ज़िंदगी आपका इम्तिहान ले रही हो। ये घटना जो मैं कहना चाहता हूँ, रात 2 और 3 जून की प्रभात बंकर से दूरी हमारी तकरीबन 30 गज और पूरे देश की निगाहें थी तोलोलिंग के ऊपर, और हमने तकरीबन 4 हमले कर चुके थे, लेकिन पूर्ण सफलता तोलोलिंग पे प्राप्त नहीं हो रही थी। जब हम वहाँ पे 20-22 दिन तक ये हमला करते रहे रात दिन, और आखिर में मेरे दोस्त, मेरे सेकंड इन कमांड, जो मेरे छोटे भाई से भी बढ़ के मुझसे अजीज़ थे, कर्नल विश्वनाथन और मैंने खुद, दोनों ने फैसला किया कि प्रभात बंकर और तोलोलिंग के लिए हम खुद हमले में जाएंगे, क्योंकि पूरे देश की निगाहें थी कि कब तोलोलिंग को कब्जे में लिया जाएगा। रात को तकरीबन 1 बजे जब हमने हमला शुरू किया, जब हम तकरीबन आधा रास्ता पार कर ही पाए थे, और इस हमले में कर्नल विश्वनाथ सबसे आगे थे, लीड कर रहे थे, हम सब के ऊपर बहुत भारी तादाद में दुश्मन का फायर आया और हम वहीं पे पिन डाउन हो गए। ये टाइम था जब हमारा भी उनके ऊपर काफ़ी फायर हो रहा था। कर्नल विश्वनाथ ने आगे से मुझे कहा कि सर अपना फायर बंद करवाइए। बड़ा अजीबो गरीब इत्तेफाक है, जब मैं सेट से बात कर रहा था तो सेट थोड़ा मैंने आगे खींचा, जब क्रॉल कर रहा था तो मैंने देखा मेरा ऑपरेटर लांस हवलदार राम कुमार शहीद हो चुका है। सूबेदार रणधीर जो मेरे से थोड़ा आगे थे, मैंने उनको आवाज़ लगाई, जो साथ में लड़का था वो कहता है साहब भी शहीद हो चुके हैं। इसी दौरान जो ऑपरेटर था टवाइसी साहब का, विश्वनाथन साहब का, उन्होंने मेरे को आवाज़ लगाई कि साहब टवाइसी साहब की गोली लग चुकी है और बहुत भारी फायर है, और फिर भी साहब बड़ी बहादुरी से फायर करते जा रहे हैं। तो मैंने एकदम कहा कि इनको पीछे खींचिए, इनको सेफ जगह पे लाइए। 2-3 लड़के लेके मैं खुद आगे जाके उनको पीछे लाया। बर्फ़ थी, मौसम बहुत ख़राब था, वो ठीक थे, बातचीत कर रहे थे। मैंने कहा विश्वनाथ कोई बात नहीं, आप ठीक हो जाओगे। अब फायर के बीच में हम उनको नीचे लाए। नीचे तकरीबन लाने में आधा पौना घंटा हमको लगा। उनकी हमने फर्स्ट एड की। शायद भाग्य की विडंबना थी, ये होना तय था। वो मेरे गोद में थे, मैंने उनको काफ़ी उनके हाथ को गर्म करने की कोशिश की, उनके पाँव को गर्म करने की कोशिश की, लेकिन वो मेरे गोद में आखिरी दम तोड़ गए। ये वो घटना है जिस घटना को हम सब 18 ग्रेनेडियर्स के परिवार में जिंदगी भर नहीं भुला सकते।
भुला नहीं सकते वतन पे ये एहसान, सूनी कलाई सूनी बाहें आंगन है वीरा, तू है दोस्त हमको याद रहेगा, भारत को हमेशा तुझ पर नाज रहेगा।
I rang up the CO sometimes in the afternoon and offered my condolences and told him how sorry I was that Vishy was no more. And since they had also lost a very brave officer about 2 days before that, Rajesh Adhikari. So I told him that, look, you're the commanding officer, and at this time the whole battalion is looking up to you. So get a hold of yourself, get a hold of your battalion, and be ready for the next task.
दोस्त हमको याद रहेगा, भारत को हमें
As May turned to June, the army continued taking heavy losses in Kargil. But by now, enough evidence was available to show that the army was not fighting a ragtag bunch of Afghan Mujahideen or Kashmiri militants. It had been established without doubt that this was not a Pakistani-backed intrusion, but a deliberate incursion by the regular Pakistani army. Ample evidence was available of the presence of units of Pakistan's Northern Light Infantry. Even as the Indian Prime Minister rejected Pakistan's demand to stop airstrikes, he accepted Nawaz Sharif's proposal to send Sartaj Aziz to India. Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh added that meaningful dialogue between the two neighbors could only happen after the sanctity of the line of control was restored. Defence Minister George Fernandes ruled out cessation of ground action until every square inch of Indian territory had been cleared of the enemy. The Indian army went on full alert all along the border in Rajasthan and Punjab, even as the airstrikes were assumed in full force. As international pressure on Pakistan increased, cracks began to appear in its leadership. Sartaj Aziz flew in and out of Delhi with no impact on the conflict. Meanwhile, the Indian horizon saw its first glimmer of joy. In the ongoing World Cup matches, India conclusively beat Pakistan at the Old Trafford. In Dras, the 8th Sikh had established encampments all around Tiger Hill. Their radio operators interrupted curt messages from Pakistani officers to their men.
The World Cup match was going on, and I had an access to a transistor, and I was keenly hearing the commentary. So as soon as the match got over and the result was out that Pakistan has lost the match, so I started relaying this message to each and every post, because they didn't have an access to the transistor, and telling them what the result has been. So while I was doing that, एक हल्की सी बीच में आवाज़ आई कि भैया आप क्यों इतनी तकलीफ कर रहे हो, हम ही दे देते मैसेज. So that is how we got to know someone is listening to us, and that person got so frustrated that he came to our, he started talking on our frequency, and then we immediately changed our frequency. Then later on after a few days, we intercepted an even more interesting message. The message was कि एक पाकिस्तानी दूसरे से बात कर रहा था. He was telling भाई ये क्रिकेट मैच तो हार चुके हो, भाई ये ना हार जाना.
Despite this brief surge of Pakistani pessimism, they were still very much in control of the heights. Under tremendous pressure for results, the 8th Mountain Division of General Puri had started a massive artillery deployment, including the infamous Bofors gun.
The artillery has played a tremendous role in the entire operations. We tried out the Bofors guns, the very famous Bofors guns, and we developed a tremendous amount of confidence in them. They were used in a new concept of employment, like they were used in direct firing role. When I say direct firing role, I say you deploy the gun over here, and it is visible, the objective is visible to the gun, to the people who are the gunners, the crew of the gun, and then they fire directly onto the objective.
Throughout the conflict, the artillery was to come in for lavish praise from the humble Jawan right up to the corps commander.
It was the first time that artillery was employed in a very unique manner. We had these 155mm guns. I won't say, I don't want to say that Bofors or anything, but it's the caliber which matters. It's not the make, whether it was 155mm Bofors or even if it was the Austrian gun or the French gun Sofma, they would have done as well because there are only marginal differences in each one of them. But this 155mm guns, they were the mainstay of this battle. We also used them in a very, very innovative manner, and these ideas also came from down below. It was Brigadier Lakhvinder Singh, who was the Commander Artillery Brigade, who tried them, tested them in direct firing role. We didn't know, earlier on we used to think that these guns can fire and engage targets only at about 3 to 4 kilometers in direct firing, and to our amazement, at 11-12 kilometer range, these guns were so effective, which made the task of the infantry very easy. The contribution of artillery was unique, and the manner in which artillery was used, actually it was used as a combat arm.
though the artillery under its dynamic commander Brigadier Lakhvinder Singh was to perform with remarkable success, living up to its motto, Sarvatra Izzat-o-Iqbal. Its deployment in the mountains for high-altitude warfare was not without problems.
There are a number of problems. You have very few areas available for deployment. Then the features in front of you are very high, so normally by and large you fire at high angle. The other problems that you have is that mountains, especially rocky mountains that you have here, do not take very kindly to a lighter weapon system. The impact is more profound if the shell is heavier, and that is where a heavier weight shell like Bofors or a heavier mortar, 160mm mortar, was very effective.
Initially they moved with caution, but soon they were developing new techniques combining experience with innovation.
Our mind ran back to the history, and we thought of the days of Babur and Ranjit Singh, where simple guns were used for direct firing and quite effectively. If that was the case, why not a sophisticated weapon system like the Bofors gun?
Very soon in the battle, the foot soldier came to look upon the Bofors with great affection.
This is the famous Bofors gun, which was a mainstay during the Battle of Daras. By the time a 42 kilos projectile leaves this barrel here, it gains a speed of 837 meters per second. In planes, the shell can land 30 kilometers away from this gun. In high altitude, because of rarefied air, the shell travels further 6 kilometers, and we achieve a range of up to 36 kilometers. Gun is state-of-art technology and has tremendous advantages over other guns. One of them is a very fast rate of fire. It can fire 3 rounds in 14 seconds, which is a very good rate of fire. It has a system called the APU, the Auxiliary Power Unit, which functions all the systems of the guns and can also move the gun for shorter distances. That is why this gun is known to have shoot and scoot capability.
As the artillery was moving into place, the preparations of the infantry for a final assault on Tololing were also underway.
2 Rajrif was the battalion which first arrived on the scene, and they were given the task to capture Tololing. We took about 11 or 12 days to really prepare for this operation. The battalion had to get acclimatized. The commanding officer and the rest of the officers had to carry out a proper reconnaissance of the objective. So this took about 11-12 days, and by that time I was quite confident that at least the battalion was ready for the task for which I had sort of earmarked them.
The Rajputana Rifles was the oldest rifle regiment of the Indian Army, its first battalion being raised as far back as January 1775. The 2 Raj Rifles had the honor of winning the first Victoria Cross ever given to the Indian Army. This was won by Captain John Augustus in 1856 in Persia. This battalion had now camped out at Minamarg, practicing war skills when they received their marching orders in early June. They moved from Minamarg and took up positions in and around Tololing.
Standing here, one can appreciate the importance of Tololing in the Battle of Kargil. On to my left, you see Tololing, which is approximately about 4 to 5 kilometers from this road, Srinagar-Leh. The importance of this road lies in the fact that it is the only road link from Srinagar to Leh. This road is not open throughout the year. It's open generally from about June to October, and this is the season in which the complete stocking for Leh sector has to be done. So hence it was very important that Tololing be the first feature to be captured.
Now began the arduous task of planning and reconnaissance. Colonel M.B. Ravindranath, who personified the adage of an officer and a gentleman, was a soldier right down to his boots, and it showed in his meticulous planning. He and Major Vivek Gupta met with Colonel Kushal Thakur of the 18 Grenadiers for a debrief. Thakur was still holding a firm base up the hill. Ravindranath then sent his young officers for a recce of the objective. When they met back for a debrief, Ravindranath came to a frightening conclusion. There was no route for an attack on Tololing except for the route chosen by the grenadiers.
And as a military man, I was very apprehensive of attacking Tololing from directions from which the attacks had already failed, because that's generally the thing you are not supposed to do. But yet, once we found that we had no other option, then I discussed with my company commanders, that's Vivek and Mohit. Then we said we have to work a method of attacking through the same areas where the attacks have not been successful before.
Even as Ravindranath was exploring strategic options, he was also stocking ammunition and supplies. Carrying 800 porter loads of material up the hill to the firm base was a nightmare.
The most tense period was when we started building up. The amount of stores which had to be carried up really put a lot of stress onto my men. Even my cooks, barbers, whose duty it is not to do this kind of a work, they volunteered and they said no, it is the izzat of the battalion. And I am quite sure that went a long way in motivating the other people to say that if a barber can do this for the battalion, why can't I do something more?
ये भाई साहब हमारे जो अभी कटिंग कर रहे हैं, ये बार्बर, ये भी साथ साथ चलते रहे. इनका काम था पीछे पीछे अनुमेशन पहुंचाना.
जब हमारी पूरी पलटन चढ़ रही थी टोलोलिंग पर, तो हम पीछे कैसे रह सकते हैं, इसलिए हम इनको साथ चलते रहे.
As D-Day drew close in an unprecedented gesture, General Puri arrived on the front to bid these brave men Godspeed and good luck.
3 or 4 days before the attack was to be launched, I went and spoke to the men. I addressed the whole battalion and spoke to them of their regimental traditions, of the old history of the battalion, how well they had done in various wars, the fine commanders which they had in the battalion, this commanding officer who was an outstanding person. And I also mentioned to them that look, war comes once in a lifetime.
Ravindranath decided on launching 2 simultaneous attacks. One from the southwestern spur led by Major Mohit Saxena on point 4590 and the Barbad bunker complex. The Ghataks under Captain Kenguruze were to go behind the feature to cut off any counter-attack. The direct assault on the Tololing top and the flat area would be led by Major Vivek Gupta and his Charlie company.
I had chosen this company because this happened to be my champion company, and this company had some that instinct to win. When I told them, I said that you are the champion company of the battalion, and let's see whether you can prove that you are only a champion company in the sports field or you are also as good in the battlefield. And the kind of response I got there was overwhelming, and some of them are not with me, but the words they said to me before they left are etched in my mind. Bhawarlal told me, he said, साहब अब आपको सुबह हमें मिलो टॉप के ऊपर 3 बजे, हम चाय पिलाएगा आपको. He is no more, but at 3 o'clock I was there on the top, and he had kept his promise, but I could not tell him shabash. And then I had this Dharamveer who was leading another platoon. He told me, he shook my hand and told me, he said, साहब आर या पार, धर्मवीर या उधर मिलेगा या मरा हुआ मिलेगा, लेकिन आपको वो फ्लैट एरिया आपको मिलेगा. एंड यशवीर अगेन CHM यशवीर, he said, साहब हमारा चैम्पियन कंपनी है, दिखाएंगे कि ज़मीन पे भी चैम्पियन है, आप सुबह वहाँ पर मिलो. Again that man is no more. I couldn't congratulate him and tell him that yes, you chaps have proved your worth.
Ravindranath's champion company commander chosen to capture Tololing had more than one reason to celebrate. Being on the verge of a divorce with his wife, Captain Rajshri Bisht, Vivek had just received a letter from her asking for a reconciliation. Brimming over with happiness, Vivek had shared this news with Ravindranath, even as he promised his CO the capture of Tololing. The final assault on Tololing began on the night of the 12th, 13th of June at 8:30 p.m.
Yeah, this is how the Tololing ridge would look like. This, if is Tololing, this would be hump and this would be 5140. So enemy had captured this. This is the top, Tololing top, enemy was holding on to this. This was what was known as the general area of Barbad bunker. So this was also held by the enemy, and this is the southwestern approach and this is the southeastern approach. So what you see here represents the fire base where we had established the fire base for southeastern approach, and this is the fire base which was established for southwestern approach. So as I told you before, we had decided to attack it from two directions. One company was to attack top from here, another company was to attack Barbad bunker from this side. So on 12th, when the firing started, we were able to engage this Barbad bunker and snow top or this Tololing top with direct firing of artillery, and this whole thing was brought under artillery fire.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram,
As Major Mohit Saxena and Captain Nikozake Kengruze started their assault on point 4590, Major Sandeep Bajaj, the second in command of the battalion, was directing RL fire from a firm base 400 yards below.
The attack was progressing at about 11 in the night. Mohit had taken the first two features on 4590. Nemo had reached behind the Pakistanis, and I was on the fire base about 400 meters from where the attack was going on. So it was my job to control the fire. Whatever fire Mohit or Nemo asked for, I had to get it onto the objective. Then the battle started in great earnest. The Pakistanis came 25-30 strong, started attacking his position. So we decided that we'll hit the Pakistanis with the only effective weapon that we had for that area, that was the rocket launcher. So now it was a tough job, you know. Mohit was sitting here, Nemo was sitting here, the Pakistanis were in between, and I had to fire into between them. So I had to take corrections from both these guys. So first shot I fired, I think I almost killed Mohit. I almost killed him. Huh? So he was thrown on the radio set. I was Rahim, and Nemo was Nemo. Nemo can only be Nemo. So we fired. I fired first shot. I think almost killed him, and he shouted back on the radio set, "Sir, but that's on my head." So I said, "Okay, hold. I'll give the next shot a plus." And we gave the next shot a plus, and Nemo behind. It landed, I think, almost on his head. So he got me on the radio set. He says, "Sir," he used to speak in a very measured tone. He says, "Sir, but you almost killed me." So I said, "No, this is a very funny battle going on," but we managed to get the corrections, and slowly we got the Pakistanis where we wanted. Next day when I met him in the morning, he refused to talk to me. He said, "Sir, you almost killed me." I said, "Yeah, that's war."
Every time I said one thing on the radio set, "Sir, please don't fire at me." That was the only thing I was saying.
As Mohit and his men were steadily climbing, their assault was halted by a heavy barrage of fire from behind a rock. The company was pinned down by this fire. It was then that Havaldar Sultan Singh Narwaria volunteered to climb a rock to divert the enemy fire, knowing that he was climbing to certain death. Sultan Singh walked into military history. He climbed the rock and kept firing. Taking the enemy fire onto himself, he neutralized their medium machine guns. He died crouched at his gun, firing at the enemy. His patka kept flapping in the wind even after his death, giving the impression that he was invincible and alive. Astounded at his courage, his comrades charged up to capture point 4590. Meanwhile, the attack on the southeastern spur had run into trouble. Vivek Gupta, codenamed Cobra, put young Lieutenant Tomar in charge of evacuating casualties, and to the cries of Raja Ramchandra ki Jai, his Charlie company made a determined assault on the top. JCO Dharamveer captured the Tololing top. But his company commander Vivek Gupta had fallen on the slopes below in the early hours of the 13th of June, 1999. exactly 7 years after he'd been commissioned with the Indian Army on the 13th of June 1992. Vivek had fulfilled his promise to his CO, capturing Tololing, winning a Mahavir Chakra. Vivek's reconciliation with his wife also did take place. In the 3rd week of June, Captain Rajshri Bisht of the Armoured Medical Corps, her head held high, took her place in line behind generals, admirals and air marshals to place a wreath on Vivek Gupta's body. The country stood still as the young captain gently touched her husband's coffin in a final gesture of reconciliation. Surely, this was a frozen moment in history. Meanwhile, on the southwestern spur, Major Mohit Saxena and Captain Kangaroozee, followed by Major Acharya and Captain Vijay Thapar, were making steady progress. But while climbing up, Major Saxena had lost his radio and operator in a bomb blast. At the base, Colonel Ravindranath had lost radio links with commanders of both his assault companies. Fearing the worst, he started climbing with the Bravo company, while his second-in-command, Major Sandeep Bajaj, started leading the Alpha company up the hill.
Around 3 in the morning, we had all moved up to the top. I had taken Alpha company on beyond into Barbad bunker area. Mohit was there, but we knew that something was amiss. As I was the 2IC, I knew that a major casualty had happened and Vivek was no more. It was snowed on top. There was, at a lot of places you could see patches of blood, you know. It was red, it was almost reddish, and the snow was almost reddish with the amount of blood over there. Find some bandages lying. Pakistani bandages, our bandages, somebody dragging somebody away, somebody's foot blown off lying on the side, and dead, Pakistani dead, and our dead.
I reached the place around about 3 o'clock. Barbad bunker had not been fully taken. So part of it had been taken by Delta company under Mohit Saxena. So I had to take a decision at that time as to what do I do now, because I had large number of people who were injured. About 6 chaps had lost their legs at that time, and about 15 to 20 people were injured and bleeding. So the final choice which was left to me was that okay, I hold on to this top and wait out the day, and night we recapture that or clear that opposition which is pinning us down, and evacuate the casualties at night. Or I had the option of taking the risk of attacking during daytime and hoping like hell that that we make through and then I am able to evacuate the casualties. So I put these things together. I thought that attacking through day may be able to give me better dividends, in the sense that the people who were with me on top were bleeding. So I really feared that if I wait for the complete day and another night, probably they would have died of bleeding itself. So I was going to have about 15 to 20 chaps dead on top out of bleeding because we were not able to evacuate them, versus that I had to take a decision on maybe 2-3 chaps will die and some more will become injured, but the objective will be taken. So I went in for the second option, and they say luck favors the brave.
Luck did favor Ravindranath. At 6 a.m. on the 13th of June, Ravindranath called up his brigade commander with a gift to a grateful nation.
And I told him that True Rajref has completed the task allotted to it. We captured Tololing top, Barbad bunker complex. And he said, well done, thank you, out. If a battalion achieves its mission, then the sacrifices of the people who have laid down their lives has not gone wasted. Some of us who are alive may be forgotten very soon, but those who died will not be forgotten in the battalion for times immemorial.
दुश्मन की तरफ जोश में हर लम्हा बढ़े थे, लहराने तिरंगा वो फौजी इस आज़्म से ऊंची कोई परवाज़ नहीं है। खामोश है वादी, कोई आवाज नहीं है।
The victory of Tololing turned the tide for India. Not only did it restore the country's faith in its army, it also changed the mood of the soldiers. Sullen despair gave way to assurance, courage and belief. The recoveries made on Tololing gave the army its first accurate insight into the strength and motive of the enemy.
The turning point in the battle came once we got the Tololing feature. That was the beginning. Till then we were working on a concept that they are 30-40 people, and if they are 30-40 people, a battalion should be able to handle the position. But our eyes got opened when we made very large recoveries of automatic weapons. In fact, after Tololing was captured, we found 8 machine guns and 4 grenade launchers, 4 rocket launchers, and many other weapons, which was equivalent to the firepower of almost a battalion. I mean, say here it was a platoon plus about 40 people, maybe 50 people who were there holding it, having that kind of firepower. Then we realized that this is the pattern that we are going to face. We changed our complete approach, and thereafter for every feature we went in from 3 to 4 directions. With 3 to 4 battalions we went in with overwhelming superiority, and we went in from totally unexpected directions and surprised the enemy, and we were able to handle the situation better, and we were not looking back. Turning point was Tololing capture by 2 Rajref, and that gave the opening, and thereafter every feature in Dras sector fell one after the other.
As the army slowly recovered its confidence, the nation slowly regained its dignity. The Sensex inched upwards, the market stabilized, and a feeling of helplessness gave way to hope. Pakistani frustration, on the other hand, gave way to rage as they relentlessly target the 8 Div headquarters of General Puri. Puri himself had a miraculous escape but was forced to move his headquarters.
The day Tololing was captured and .4875 we were under his observation, he gave us a tremendous amount of shelling on our Div headquarters, and we had to finally leave that place and go to another place. And there the commanding officer of my signal regiment, he was wounded. He was wounded in the legs and he had to be evacuated. And also we lost 2 signalers in this heavy shelling.
In a gesture that had few parallels in modern history, Prime Minister Vijay flew to the front to visit his soldiers in Kargil. Even as he was addressing his troops in an act of extreme cowardice, the Pakistanis started shelling the area. Unruffled, Atal Bihari shrugged off the bombing in a humorous vein.
कल मैं कारगिल के इलाके में गया था, उन्होंने तोपें चलाकर सलामी दी.
Back in Delhi, he received a call from the White House expressing great appreciation for Indian restraint. Even as President Clinton called up Sharif to urge him to withdraw from Indian territory, Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh travelled to Beijing to brief Chinese leaders on the Indian stand. In Kargil, airstrikes continued to demoralize the Pakistani forces, even with strict orders not to cross the line of control or engage the enemy in Pakistani airspace. The Air Force flew on one wing, the other strapped firmly behind.
Now, as I may not have mentioned this, we were under some restrictions during these operations. We had very clear instructions that we were not to cross the line of control. This prevented us from executing the correct or the most optimum attack profiles or attack directions and restricted our attacks.
Initially there was some disappointment from our side because we did realize that the effects of Air Force, the effects of air power will not be as fast as we would have liked had we been given the liberty to carry out interdiction on the other side of the line of control.
Despite these difficult conditions, the Air Force took a heavy toll on enemy morale as they blew up a large ammunition dump in encampment in Mantho-Dalu.
One of the targets very close to the line of control was a place called Mantho-Dalu. This was a major supply camp and a transit point for the infiltrators. This camp was almost wiped out from the surface by the mirages.
Meanwhile, the conflict in Kargil was intensifying. Its maritime dimensions were coming to a boil in the Arabian Sea. Even though the Indian Navy had performed exceedingly well in 1971, memories of a sneak Pakistani attack in Dwarka in 1965 still rankled in their memory. At that time, they had been literally caught in the wrong ocean conducting exercises around the Bay of Bengal. India's elegant Chief of Navy Admiral Sushil Kumar had made sure that his ships would seize the initiative at sea. By the end of May, his commands in the west had increased their vigil as the Coast Guard's assets had been conjoined, even as their dorniers augmented air searches. The aim was to prevent possible strikes by the Pakistani Navy. Defensive measures were implemented at all vital harbors and ports as the Eastern Fleet strike forces sailed for the west coast. Codenamed Operation Talwar, the Navy started conducting war games in the Arabian Sea. Sushil Kumar's aim was very clearly to prevent any enemy misadventure.
In a tactical sense, the swift and speedy deployment of our combined eastern and western fleets was meant to seize the initiative at sea in a decisive manner. Our battle groups remained well poised in case the Kargil conflict escalated and should it spill over into the Arabian Sea. In a strategic sense, our Navy's combat power was aimed at the soft underbelly of Pakistan. In a manner of speaking, this is what sea power is all about. And this was really the role that the Indian Navy played during the Kargil conflict in support of our brave comrades in the Army and Air Force who were fighting on the LOC.
The Admiral continued his build-up, putting the Pakistani Navy on the defensive. He parked his ships in international waters 12 nautical miles off Karachi in an extremely aggressive posture. The immediate threat was to choke the port of all oil supplies coming from the sea. The tactics of deterrence worked. The Pakistani Navy flashed messages to all its units to keep well clear of Indian ships and not to close in on any Indian Navy formations. Pakistani warships started escorting oil tankers as Pakistani ports prepared for defensive action. All this while intelligence reports confirmed the growing rift between Pakistan's Admiral Fasi Bukhari and General Parvez Musharraf. The Pakistani Navy claimed it had not been forewarned of the Kargil conflict. It also claimed it was still not getting accurate briefs. India's defense establishment, on the other hand, worked as one force. Close personal relationships between the Admiral, the Air Marshal and the General enhanced professional competence, even as it cut through bureaucracy and red tape. With a defense minister who reached out to his forces and a prime minister who held his chiefs in great regard, the Indian establishment presented a strong, unified command structure. The much criticized Indian intelligence agencies tried to somewhat redeem themselves when they released a taped conversation between Parvez Musharraf and his Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Aziz, where they both derided Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and conspired to misinform him and the world of Pakistani motives and actions. Meanwhile, in Dras, shortly after the Prime Minister's visit, the Indian Chief of Army had flown over Tololing to congratulate the brave soldiers of the 2 Raj Rifles on their conquest.
I went, I think, after 2 days, and I wanted to land on top of Tololing. The helicopter pilot wouldn't hear of that. So I said, okay, let me just fly over these. And when I flew over Tololing, I found there were these Rajrif boys all sitting together with only rocks to provide them some cover. It was their lunchtime, I think between 12 and 1 in the afternoon. Some of them were eating their food. So they waved out at me, and you cannot imagine the feeling when these boys were waving at me. I felt great for them and for the army.
Commissioned on the 6th of June, Malik was posted to the 3 Sikh Light Infantry. Following a distinguished career in the army, 9 years later, on the 20th of May 1968, Malik proposed to a young doctor in the Army Medical Corps. He married Dr. Ranjana on the 30th of September of that year. He commanded the 10 Sikh Light Infantry between 74 and 77 and the 162 Brigade between 83 and 85. In 1987, he took over the command of the 8th Mountain Division, which was to so gallantly fight the battles of Dras under General Puri. Malik was Corps Commander of the 11th Corps and Army Commander of the Southern Command before becoming the Vice Chief of the Army in 1996. After 45 years of being in uniform, he retires as the Chief on the 30th of September 2000. The same day he completes 32 years of married bliss. He leaves one son in the Sikh Light Infantry who is also married to a doctor in the Army Medical Corps. As Chief of the Army, Malik's role was limited to planning at a macro level. He was to ensure that his troops all along the border in the Run of Kutch, in Punjab, in Rajasthan and in Jammu were ready for any eventuality. He was to ensure all logistical support to the Corps in Kargil. As Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was to ensure coordination between the 3 services. He was to liaise with the political leadership. He was to guide the direction of the war. And he was eventually to lead India to military victory. But with all this, Malik also had time to deal with individual problems of junior officers.
I remember one Lieutenant Colonel, 2IC of a battalion. He wrote me a letter. He said that they were short of some radio sets and some other equipment. And it was a pathetic letter. Anybody in his position, perhaps he would have written. I didn't mind it one bit. It was an inland letter, a forces letter, which you write which you get in field areas. And he had written it on that. I rang up the Corps Commander and the Div Commander and I told them, this is the letter that I have received. Please make sure that he gets all the equipment that he needs and don't send this battalion into battle till they have got that. Incidentally, I replied to him in my own handwriting, not on a forces letter, but on a normal letter. But I wrote to him personally.
Though flying into the battle zone at least once a week, he gave his generals and brigade commanders complete freedom of planning and execution. A young major on the front, while describing his chief, paid him the greatest compliment when he said, "He's OG, completely olive green, a soldier to his boots." On one of Malik's visits to the front, he was to meet a young captain who had captured the imagination of the country with his one-liner, "Ye dil mange more."
I do remember an incident when some of these boys, including Batra, they met me after capturing the first feature, and he mentioned to me about Dil Mange More. And I asked him, I said, which is going to be your next attack? And he said he was ready for it, full of high spirit, the smile on his face and in his eyes. And I realized that with such young leaders, we shall win. The victory will be ours. That gave me a lot of confidence. In fact, whenever I needed confidence, I always went to the front. And these boys of 8 Mountain Div and 3 Mountain Div, they always raised my morale.
Young Batra belonged to the Tivra Tera, or the 13 Jammu and Kashmir Rifles. Raised in 1966 at Golconda, this unit was moving to Shahjahanpur after a stint in CI Ops in Supur, when it was moved to Gumri on the 10th of June for high-altitude warfare. Moving to Dras the next day, the unit was given 3 days to acclimatize. Despite the capture of Tololing, the Indian dominance of the Dras area would not be complete without the capture of Point 5140.
Point 5140 was a very dominating feature in the Dras subsector. It not only dominated Tololing complex and the hump, but it also dominated the Dras village and a very large stretch of the National Highway 1 Alpha. It was from here that the enemy could bring down very effective observed artillery fire on Tololing, on Dras and the National Highway 1 Alpha in the area. And it was from here that the enemy fired the Stinger missile when it brought down one of our helicopters in the area of Tololing. Thus the importance of capturing 5140 at the earliest. 13 Jack RIF was tasked for the capture of point 5140.
13 Jack got their first unfortunate taste of the war even before they went into battle.
On the 12th of June, we moved to Dras. However, once we moved to Dras, there was a big problem of where to locate the battalion, since all along the National Highway 1 Alpha, from Dras, a couple of kilometers on either side, there were artillery guns located there. And we are not supposed to locate the infantry unit next to a RT gun position because of the danger of counter bombardment. With the great difficulty, we could manage to locate a place close to Dras where we concentrated. However, later we suffered some casualties in this area because at night the enemy, the own mortar position which was firing close by, moved to its alternative position and moved further close to our unit location, and because of the enemy counter bombardment we suffered heavy casualties, including Major Ajay Jasrotia, who lost his life at the base itself while trying to evacuate casualties.
After the capture of Tololing, 13 Jack moved up to the peak. 18 grenadiers had already moved to capture the areas around Tololing called the Hump. The 13 Jack cleared the base of 5140 of all enemy presence. It was here that Major Joshi, Captain Jimmy Jamwal and Captain Vikram Batra held precarious positions, waiting for final orders for the assault. The orders that came for Joshi on the 19th of June were ones that he would remember all his life.
Once on Tololing top, I got a call from General Puri, who informed me that my commanding officer had been taken ill and had to be evacuated. And he promoted me and told me and gave me the command of the battalion.
Things were moving very fast for Joshi. Events were overtaking themselves. Even as the two captains and their newly promoted CO were finalizing their plans, an arty shell exploded at their firm base at the Hump complex. It was here that Joshi remembers with pride the role of his unit's doctor, Dr. Rajesh Adhau.
Our doctor, the RMO of the battalion, Captain Rajesh Adhau, did an excellent job during the Operation Vijay. He was full of initiative and quite a peppy character who used to move around doing things beyond what he is supposed to do. When the unit was going for the assault for 5140, he would get the companies together in a dead ground and give a big pep talk, to the extent he told the boys that I have to just touch any casualty and I can assure you that nothing will happen to him. And true to his word, till we deactivated from there, any officer, any casualty, any Jawan he touched, he reached, did not face any problems and sailed through effectively. And he himself was moving right up, so nobody had to come back to him. The doctor was there right in front, looking after the casualties.
This doctor had been a constant source of strength to his battalion. Before the start of the battle, he had gathered the assault troops, who were nearly all Dogras, and charged them up with a religious sermon. He assured them that he would be right behind them to look after all casualties. You have to be alive when I reach you, he said, and I promise I will save you.
This was a big morale booster for the entire battalion, because when the Jawans are assured that you've got such a good doctor, who look after you, and he'll assure you that nothing will happen, so the morale was absolutely sky high, and the boys were really going. The doctor did a very, very good job. And another incident here is when we were in the area of Hump complex. Now, we had an arty shell in the area of Hump, and we suffered 7 casualties. So I had to get a doctor immediately during daylight. So I told the doctor sitting at Hump that, doctor, you required immediately, please come down straight away. So without even a little bit of hesitation, the doctor, I could see sitting from Hump looking backward at Tololing. He came running down a very marked track, and the moment he started, the enemy started firing onto him with direct weapons. And just like you see in the movies, the doctor was dodging the bullets, running down the track, and came down, and I was sitting there keeping my fingers crossed that whatever I had done, I shouldn't lose the doctor here. But fortunately, though running a little clumsily, he's a doctor, not an infantry soldier, but he reached safely and was able to look after all the casualties.
Now Joshi briefed his 2 young company commanders on the details for the night's assault. They went up to Rocky Knob for a reconnaissance.
Gradient from Hump complex to 0.5140 was quite steep, and the movement was very slow. So therefore, I emphasized to both the company commanders that we have to reach the top before first light, because if we are not able to reach the top before first light, then the enemy will not allow the companies to sit anywhere in between, and we'll suffer very heavy casualties. So Jamwal, who was one of the company commanders, he laughingly said, not to worry, in the morning, before daybreak, we'll get the success signal. So I asked the company commander, just to pep up the morale, I said, okay, what would be your success signal? I asked Jamwal. So he thought for a moment and he told me that, sir, my success signal would be, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I said, that's a very funny success signal. Why this? He said, sir, I am ex-NDA Hunter Squadron, and there we used to have this slogan. So I said, okay, you carry on with that. You have your success signal as, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I asked Vikram Batra, the other company commander, that what would your success signal be? He again thought for a moment and he told me that, sir, my success signal would be, ye dil mange more. I said, why this success signal? So he says that, sir, I'll capture the bunkers in that area, and thereafter I'll look for some more bunkers, some more enemy to capture and kill.
At 9 p.m., 21 batteries of the artillery opened fire on 5140, even as the 2 companies started their arduous climb. Hearty fire was to continue until the 2 companies were 200 yards from the top. Jimmy Jamwal, codenamed Sangram, skirted from the left between the thumbs-up feature and 5140 to lead his Bravo company from the western side to capture the left position. Vikram Batra, codenamed Shersha, started leading a frontal assault with his Delta company to eventually attack the right bunker and capture the right side of the feature. By 3 a.m., Jimmy Jamwal had blown up 3 Sangars, reaching very close to the enemy. Basketball champion Havaldar Meher lost his arm in arty shelling from the top, but his company continued the assault. At 3:35, Colonel Joshi, codenamed Chanakya, received a signal that was music to his ears.
Sir! Oh yeah!
Jamwal moved to reinforce Sheshah's attack. Climbing sheer rock surface, his company was in direct line of fire, making slow progress. The time moved from 3:30 to 4, and then to 4:30. As the first rays of light slowly started illuminating the horizon, Joshi lost hope of seeing his young company commander. And then at 4:35, as the skyline was turning a light blue, the radio spluttered into life, immortalizing Vikram Batra's choice of phrase.
ये दिल मांगे मोल नहीं है, क्या अज़्म था किस अज़्म से वो जंग लाए थे, दुश्मन की तरफ जोश में हर लम्हा बढ़े थे, लहराने तिरंगा वो फौजी चोटी पे चढ़े थे, इस आज़्म से ऊंची कोई परवाज़ नहीं है।
Dearest Papa, Mama, Birdie and Granny, by the time you get this letter, I'll be observing you all from the sky, enjoying the hospitality of the Apsaras. I have no regrets. In fact, even if I become a human again, I'll join the army and fight for my nation. If you can, please come and see where the Indian Army fought for your tomorrow. Okay then, it's time for me to join my clan of the Dirty Dozen. My assault party has 12 chaps. Best of luck to you all. Live life king size. Yours, Robin. Young Lieutenant Vijay Thapar of the 2 Rajputana Rifle died assaulting 3 pimples on the night of 28th and 29th June. The letter he wrote reached his parents after the news of his heroic death. His father, Colonel Thapar, came to Dras to fulfill his son's wishes and see for himself the place where his son and his colleagues of the 2 Rajputana Rifles gave up there today. After the capture of Tololing, the 2 Rajputana Rifles had rested for 10 days, after which they were brought in to capture the 3-pimple Black Rock Knoll complex. This was to be the most difficult and most bloody battles fought in Dras. This battle was to see the maximum officer casualties in the entire 50-day war. Apart from Vijay Thapar, his immediate senior Major Padampani Acharya and Captain Nekasake Kengruze from Nagaland were also to lay down their lives that night. The youngest casualty of the desert warriors, Vijay Thapar, was steeped in the tradition of services, being a 4th-generation army officer.
In fact, I just met Colonel Thapar. He's an old course mate of mine. He lost his son Vijay, and we were commissioned together. We joined the battalions together. We were in NDA together. And Vijay Thapar is the 4th generation in the army.
Having seen just 6 months of service, the young lieutenant was only 22 years old. But even at this young age, he was very sure what he wanted.
Very enthusiastic youngster and a very idealistic man, that
this is what is to be, this is what the nation should do, this is what I should do, this is what my father should do, this is what my mother should do, this is what my brother should do. He had a very idealistic view of the world and he lived by it. He thought, okay, this is my duty to go ahead, he will be there. You don't have to tell him that you will be there. So he was that kind of a man. And he was a very good singer. I still remember that song, which is I think the favorite song of his, which would say, "Lovely Lips." I can't sing that song, but I still remember the way he used to sing that song. It was great.
Vijay's preference of music were wide, but he was passionately attached to songs of the film Border.
You name it, he used to sing it. It's a Punjabi song, he'd sing a Punjabi song, Hindi, some pop. He'd do a Daler Mehndi type of Bhangra, switch on to something else, on to Border. Very fond of Border, that cassette.
Yeah, when we were in Myanmar, before we launched our first attack on Tololing, the only thing which used to play in his room was Border on full blast music. Every time he used to call us, "Sir, aa jao yahan par ek baar gaane sunte hain aake." And the same song used to repeat again and again.
In the last week of June, with songs of Border blaring in the camp, the battalion was preparing for its next assault. The Karni Mata idol was brought out for worship. This idol is only brought out during war. The story goes that a soldier in the regiment found it in Mesopotamia during the Second World War. His company had been surrounded by the enemy on 3 sides. The remaining side was a huge minefield. That night, a soldier saw Karni Mata in his dream. The next morning, a little lamb appeared who led the entire company out of the minefield. At the edge of the field, the lamb led them to a statue of Karni Mata. The soldier who found it used to hang it around his neck whenever the regiment went into battle. Since then, it has always been in the unit. It's worshipped during war, and when the soldiers go into battle, one of them carries it around his neck. The presence of the idol, the soldiers believe, is the reason why the 2 Rajputana rifles have never lost a battle.
It's a very old image. It was always carried into war. In fact, the Madan Sahab used to carry it on his chest, like, he used to put it in a cover, red cover, and he used to literally carry it on his chest into the war field. It is always with the Alpha company. Every evening they used to have an aarti, and that time all the people from the Alpha company and other companies used to come in there. Vijay Acharya was very prevalent, he used to say, "Karni Mata ka bali chadega."
Major Padampani Acharya was an officer who went through life oozing confidence and charm. Bravery was second nature to him. In battle, he led from the front, inspiring his men with his naked courage. Acharya's exuberance touched all those who came in contact with him.
The main thing what we used to go about in our circles was, we used to like psyching some of the people who used to be ki little bit kya ho jayega ya nahi hoga, so we used to go and ask, hey, kya baat ban jayegi? And Major Acharya and Thapa used to ask. They had their helper, this Mukesh. तो मुकेश को तंग करते थे, वो जाते थे उनके पास, मुकेश क्या बात बन जाएगी, इसके बाद चल टाइगर हिल चलते हैं. तो मुकेश यूज्ड टू बी लाइक, साहब ये तो खत्म कर लेते हैं, उसके बाद सोचेंगे. एंड लाइक, साहब क्या साहब आप हमेशा पीछे पड़े रहते हो.
हाँ, मेरे को लगभग वो बोलते थे, बोला कि बात बन जाएगी. हमेशा मतलब आचार्य साहब और थापर साहब मेरे से हमेशा ये बोलते थे, मुकेश बात बन जाएगी क्या. मैं साहब बात जरूर बनेगी. मतलब हमेशा मेरे को इस चीज़ से चिढ़ाते रहते, तो मेरे को खुशी भी बहुत होती थी इस चीज़ सुन के, बोला बात बन जाएगी. आचार्य साहब बहुत ही मतलब मजाकी आदमी थे. हरियाणवी भाषा तकरीबन बोलते रहते थे, बात बन जाएगी या ये हो रहा है छोरे, मतलब मजाक ही करते रहते तकरीबन.
The unit cook remembers him with great affection.
जब ट्रेकिंग करते आ जाते, बोले यार मिर्ची के पकौड़े खिला दो भाई हमारे को जट्टू. तो भाई अब तो है ऐसे है कि याद जब बढ़ाते हैं, जब उनकी याद आती है क्या करें. और पकौड़े बनते हैं जब या सर जी साहब हमारे को याद हर टाइम याद आ जाते हैं.
He was that one of those mercurial kind of a character who could inspire his men by his voice, and he had a very, very good voice and a very good delivery. In the last 50th anniversary of the Battle of Poonch, which we did, we made a small light and sound trying to depict what was the battle there, and he acted as the Sutradhar as to how he took the whole thing through. In the end, he gives a very, very powerful dialogue. I cannot reproduce it, but
I think he lived by that dialogue.
गिरते हैं शाह सवार ही मैदान जंग में, वो तिफल क्या गिरेगा जो घुटनों के बल चले। अनवरत और निर्बाध चलना ही मेरी नियति है, कायरों से मेरा मेल नहीं। वीर पुरुष ही मुझसे कदम मिलाया करते हैं, गर्दम है बाजुओं में और जिगर में है फौलाद। तो ऐ दो राजरिफ के ओहदेदारों और जवानों, कर जाना कुछ ऐसा जिसका बखान करने मैं बार बार आऊं। हाँ, मैं समय हूं इस पलटन के त्रिकाल का। अलविदा।
Little did Acharya know that the sands of time would soon record his bravery and immortalize his acts of courage for the future generations that would come to his battalion. A few days before his death, sitting on the hill, Acharya was to tell his comrades a story that was to change their perspective of the war and reinforce their spirit of sacrifice. The Indian Army has inherited the buddy system from the British. When going into war, every soldier and officer has a buddy, and the two are supposed to look after each other. During the Second World War, in the Indian Army that was retreating in Burma, there was a soldier called Ranjit. His buddy was fatally injured and dropped. When Ranjit heard of it, he asked his British officer if he could go back and try and retrieve his buddy. The officer refused, saying that he had seen the soldier getting shot and that he would already be dead. "If you go back," he said, "you will only get yourself killed." But Ranjit persisted and the officer gave in. Many hours later, Ranjit returned to his company, tired, injured and bleeding. After being nursed, the officer asked Ranjit, "Is your buddy dead?" Ranjit said yes. The officer then said, "See, I told you. You got yourself injured for no reason." Ranjit looked up at him and said, "No sir, I had to go. When I reached him, he had some life left in him. He heard me, opened his eyes and smiled. He looked into my eyes and said, 'I knew you would come back for me.' He died on my lap with a smile on his face." By the 27th of June, the attack plans for the Three Pimple, Knoll and Black Rock were finalized.
Once I was tasked, I carried out reconnaissance of the area. We had to go through a large amount of planning process because the information of terrain was scanty. Once we found the terrain information, and then we had to keep on changing our attack plan, and finally we arrived at an attack plan where a company would attack in front and a company would go through the defenses, enemy defenses, and attack it from the rear. So the Alpha company led by late Major Acharya was chosen to attack the front, which we call the Knoll company, Knoll location, and then we went, the Mohit Saxena was tasked to go through the enemy defenses almost about 300 meters in front of them, get through them, go behind the enemy defenses and attack them from the rear. So it was a very challenging task for that company to be able to go through enemy defenses, not get involved in the fight, go to their last location and start attacking it.
The assault started on the night of the 28th of June. Ravindranath had a sinking feeling as he bid his men farewell.
I said, "Okay gentlemen, see you all tomorrow morning." I said it as I would, with my heart, hoping like hell that I will see all of them tomorrow morning. And but in the heart of heart, I was wondering, I do not know how many of us will see each other, whether I will be alive or whether these people will be alive to see anyone tomorrow morning. The complete area where we were was being shelled, and the attack had to go through. So I just told my chaps, I told the company commanders, take your companies and get out of this place immediately, or else the attack is not going to go through. That itself was such a big morale booster for me that I am in command of troops who will dare death, who will stare in the eyes of death, and they won't bat their eyelids. That was the type of troops which I had, which I was commanding in this war.
The attack started badly, having initial casualties even before they left. Within an hour of the assault, the leading platoon was rendered ineffective.
Once the attack was progressed, Vijay Thapar's platoon got hit very badly right in the beginning. So around about 9 o'clock at night, he was shelled very badly, and out of about 22-23 people He lost 2 people, about 12 were injured. So immediately Acharya told him, okay, you just regroup yourself and follow up in the end. I'll push up with another platoon which I had kept as reserve to you. So they all charged and they got hold of one bunker, and then there was another bunker which was 25 meters, which had a sort of a depression between them. One couldn't really charge from that bunker, and it is a very, very rocky area. These rocks are nothing. You can walk in this place. There you can't even walk. You had to go from one rock to other rock. Many of these rocks are very loose boulders. So you place your foot and the whole thing comes down. So that is the type of terrain where they were fighting. And then he gave me a report on the radio set. He says, sir, I have reached the top. There's one bunker holding on. I'll blast it with the RL, and now Nol is taken.
But what had looked like an easy success at 11 p.m. turned into a bitter defeat very swiftly. Acharya charged the second bunker, giving up his life in this brave effort.
3 Peoples, Nol Hill पर अल्फा कंपनी का अटैक था। अल्फा कंपनी के कंपनी कमांडर थे पी आचार्य और कंपनी 2IC थे लेफ्टिनेंट विजय थापर। तो जब हम ऑब्जेक्ट पे पहुंचे तो वहाँ पर दुश्मन से हमारी काफ़ी संघर्ष हुआ, काफ़ी मतलब लड़ाई हुई। तो हमने फर्स्ट में एक बैंकर ले लिया था। दूसरे बैंकर के लिए काफ़ी संघर्ष जारी था, दोनों तरफ से बहुत ज़्यादा फायरिंग हो रही थी। तो मेजर पी आचार्य के साथ हम 10 बंदे थे, मेजर पी आचार्य और सीनियर जेसीओस, 1 प्लाटून का प्लाटून कमांडर सिमनायक साहब। तो मेजर साहब ने बोला कि भाई अभी अटैक होगा, क्योंकि दुश्मन बहुत तादाद में फायर कर रहा था। तो हमने बोला कि साहब अभी फायर नहीं, मतलब अटैक नहीं हो सकता, अभी काफ़ी फायर है, आप थोड़ा पीछे आ जाओ। क्योंकि इतनी आड़ भी नहीं थी, मेजर साहब थोड़ा बैठे थे तो जो है ओपन में ही थे, इतनी आड़ नहीं थी वहाँ पर। तो मैंने उनको काफ़ी बोला भी, मैं साहब सामने से फायरिंग बहुत आ रही है, आप थोड़ा पीछे आ जाओ। बोला नहीं, अटैक होगा, अभी अटैक मारेंगे। तो हमारे जो सीनियर सरदार थे वो बोले ठीक है भाई, गन्नेट आओ, गन्नेट फेंकते हैं। तो हमने 3 गन्नेट फेंके, जिसमें 2 गन्नेट फटे। वो सही जगह जाके फटे, एक गन्नेट उसमें से नहीं फटा। इतने में थोड़ी देर में ये दुश्मन का एक गन्नेट आया, वो बिल्कुल मेजर साहब जहाँ बैठे हुए थे वहीं आगे फटा, और उस फटने से मेजर साहब ख़त्म हो गए। और मान सिंह साहब जो थे सीनियर सरदार हमारे, उनको घायल हो गए, उनकी टांग में काफ़ी चोट आई। और एक ऑपरेटर था हवलदार चंद्रभान, उसकी बाजू पूरा उड़ गया था। तो फिर क्या है, काफ़ी मतलब अम्यूनिशन भी कम हमारे पास ख़त्म हो गया था, लेकिन हम लगातार दुश्मन से फायर कर रहे थे। थोड़ी देर में ही मतलब तकरीबन 1 घंटे बाद थापर साहब आए अपनी प्लाटून को लेके, और थापर साहब ने पूछा मेरे से, बोला कंपनी कमांडर साहब। मैं साहब कंपनी कमांडर साहब तो ख़त्म हो गए।
This fierce battle was also being observed by Major Ajit of the 16 Grenadiers.
On 28-29th night, when 2 Rajref was attacking 3 Pimple area, I was on listening on radio set because one of our officers, Captain Sangwan, was also accompanying the assault. The assaulting company was led by Major Acharya, and his company also was Lieutenant Thapar. I remember hearing Acharya when he cleared all the bunkers and he moved on to the last bunker, telling his CO that I'm waiting for my rocket launcher to come in and I'll blow out this bunker out of shape. And after that there was a silence, and I think he tried to move up to the bunker and use his grenades to take off the bunker. But then he got injured. We could hear it on the radio set, and then his radio operator was saying, he said like, "Saab kuch ho gaya." He told his CO.
It took some time for a shocked company to inform the commanding officer of the loss of their commander.
So I asked the radio operator, where is Acharya? And then the senior GCO came on the radio set. So बोला साहब आचार्य साहब अब नहीं रहे. And that was a bloody shock to me. Then immediately Thapar came on the radio set. So Thapar in the meantime had been able to regather his section and move up. So he came to that place. I told him, okay, get control of the company immediately. The objective has been taken. We got to hold on to it with all we have. Because again, if we have to retake this, again we'll require a company and we'll suffer some more casualties. So just hold on to this.
Brimming with a desire to avenge the death of his company commander, Thapar, who shared a very close relationship with Acharya, whom he called Tau, charged the same bunker that took his friend's life. Meanwhile, the second attack led by Major Mohit Saxena and Captain Kengruze was not faring too well. The plan for their assault was very bold. They had been tasked to go through the enemy defences and attack from the back from a feature called the Lone Hill. This hill had a sheer 90-degree climb from the base. This route had been chosen because the enemy would never expect an attack from this area, as the route was so steep that climbing it was nearly impossible. Or so they thought. Captain Kengruze and his Ghatak commandos had attempted this climb for just those same reasons. A young Naga, this officer was one of the bravest officers in the entire battalion.
Nikuzuko, it's Kengruze, who was a Naga officer and a very religious man, a very quiet kind of a man with a very impish smile. Physically extremely tough, where none of us could go in these mountains, where we thought, no, you can't go along this path. He would just look right, left, and suddenly you would find Nibu, as we called him, on top. And we would ask him, how the hell did you reach there? He says, sir, that way, this way. I told him, come down, take me back through with you again. So he would take me back and when we went for reconnaissance. And he was that kind of a chap. And he was the leader of my Ghataks, the commandos we have. And his action, the way he went about it, it reeks of a bravery of the very highest order. He was a teacher before he joined the army, and he was an excellent teacher. When in the previous location where he was located near a school, when he was not fighting insurgents, he would go to the school and teach mathematics.
Truly a gentle soul, this young officer was a devout Christian who went to church every Sunday and said grace before every meal.
Nimu was intensely religious. He never drank, which is unlike any Naga I know. Then he never smoked. He was always correct. The best thing about him was he used to say grace before each meal that he ate. In fact, the night we attacked Black Rock, the four of us were together. That is Archie, Nimu, Vijay and self. We were in the same tent. There was twice he had a small pub tent on top. There were just two pub tents before the attack, and it was raining that day. So Nimu had his puri and achar. Before having that, he said grace. He said it each time.
This gentle officer displayed a spirit and courage that was unparalleled. That night on the icy slopes of Lone Hill, it was his battle, his war, and his victory.
The climb was very tough. It was almost a vertical climb. We started climbing up, but seeing the degree of difficulty in climbing, Nimu said, sir, it's no use, I cannot climb with these shoes on because they're slipping. So he removed his shoes, he removed his socks, he started climbing up. He had an LMG with him. He went up to the top. It was barely 5 meters from the top when a burst hit him on his thigh. And there was another person called Havaldar Shravan Singh Sagar, who is also no more, and he's got a Sena medal. He advised him, sir, you should move down, and since you are badly bruised, it is better that you move down and take medical cover. But he said, no, at any cost, at no cost will I move down. I have to avenge the death of Havaldar Sultan Singh Sagar, who had died in the Battle of Tololing. Saying that, he started again climbing further ahead. But he had barely moved about a meter or so when he got a volley of bullets on his chest. And simultaneously, the enemy sitting on top started rolling down boulders. And I suppose it was the combination of the two because of which he tumbled down. I still remember that scene when he fell from top. 1, 2, 3. It was thrice he hit his, either it was his back or his face on the rock feature before he landed on the ground. And by that time he was no more. I salute Nimu for all this and hats off to him for his bravery.
Imagine climbing up in minus 20 degrees, 15 to 20 degrees on top with wind chill. He must have known that even if he doesn't, nothing happens to him, he'll lose his feet because of frostbite and this thing. But yet he went up.
With the capture of Lone Hill, the battle swung in favor of Ravindranath.
The battle which I thought was slipping out of my hand suddenly swung in my favor, and by morning that whole the objective was captured by us.
The battle was over. The assault was successful. The hill was conquered. but the victory was solemn. There was no joy.
So that night the moon was rising, it was a late this thing, the moon was rising, full moon night, and it was a yellow moon. It was not a white moon. On top it's the night, it's clear, it's crystal clear. There is absolutely, you can see for miles and miles, crystal clear. The moon rising, Archie's body, Vijay's body, Anand, rifleman, Lance Naik with him, who also died. All three of them lying together, and the moon rays coming onto their face, their bodies destroyed by the fire, and on top where we were in the bunker which we had captured, the Pakistanis had a sleeping bag. On top, all sleeping bags have feathers in it, so that sleeping bag was destroyed, and the feathers had they were all out. They were just flowing around the whole this thing, and Pakistani dead and unexploded mines, shines, the grenades and the cartridges. It made such a eerie sight that it's something that one can never forget. The moon rising, the rays on Archie's face, Vijay's face. They finally found peace. They finally found. They finally captured Naul against all odds.
Thapar leaves behind an aging grandmother, 2 old parents, and a young brother. Nimu's name meant greater happiness. This is what he gave his large family in Nagaland: happiness and joy, and finally pride. Acharya left behind a wife who gave birth to a beautiful baby girl 2 months after his death.
I personally feel that the people who did it are not with me to enjoy their fruits, and I feel that part of me has been taken off. I am not full. I don't know how long I'll take to overcome this feeling. Acharya, Thapar, Kangaroozay, and Vivek Gupta. Vivek Gupta was again very fond of his singing, and therefore with Vijay Ramanan were the life of any party we had. They would take on the dais with the wisecracks, with the songs, with music and what have you. They were this heart of this battalion, and they would get us going all the time.
Raman, the sole surviving member of the jazz band, now whiles away the solitude by humming his comrades' favorite tune.
भूला नहीं सकते वतन पे ये एहसान, भूला नहीं सकते वतन पे ये एहसान। सूनी कलाई सूनी बाहें आंगन है वीरा, तू है दोस्त हमको याद रहेगा, भारत को हमेशा तुझ पर नाज रहेगा।
As Operation Vijay moved into its 6th week, the tide had turned very clearly in India's favour. Jaswant Singh, undoubtedly India's most successful foreign minister, had charmed every potential Pakistani ally into supporting the Indian stand. General Zinni, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Central Command, was sent to Islamabad to bring Parvez Musharraf to heel, even as Nawaz Sharif flew to Beijing to solicit support from Pakistan's closest ally. But despite the close relationship between the two neighbors, China failed to respond favorably to the Pakistani premier. In Washington, Gary Ackman, co-chairman of the Congressional Caucus on India, asked for Pakistan's name to be added to the annual list of state sponsors of terrorism. The World Bank suspended all payments of loans until the Pakistani army withdrew its forces to the line of control. In early July, as Nawaz Sharif prepared to travel to Washington, the Indian army was winning back peak after peak. While the Dras sector had seen significant gains, the 70 Infantry Brigade in Baitalik, which had moved in on the 8th of May, was still to make serious headway.
Operations in Baitalik sector were distinctive in most ways vis-a-vis the Dras sector. The intrusion was the largest, both in terms of the area intruded and the strength of the enemy that came in. As per interrogation reports of the POWs captured by us, 6 to 7 companies of the Northern Light Infantry had occupied this sector. The area had the highest heights, ranging from 5,000 to 5,600 meters. The area was the remotest. The minimum walk required from the roadhead was 2 to 3 days. And that implied that a person who had once been inducted into this sector had to live off his rucksack with some replenishments for more than a month thereafter.
Highest peaks, jagged ranges, sharp cliffs, enemy-infested, inhospitable terrain. This was the Baitalik sector. The 70 Infantry Brigade concentrated on long-term results. Discarding the strategy of frontal assaults where they would have to scale icy peaks in full view of the enemy, they decided to encircle the enemy, cut off their routes of supply from Pakistan, isolate them on heights, and then clear the peaks one by one. And once this happened, the Pakistani collapse was swift.
Operations in Baitalik sector, notwithstanding the various constraints, were a spectacular success in that the enemy was routed from this sector completely by 8th or 9th of July. That is well before the political and the military negotiations had started.
One of the first success stories of Baitalik was that of the 12 Jackalai. They had been moved to the area in May. After completing a successful tenure in Siachen, this battalion was on its way to Delhi when orders came reassigning them to the war front.
इस 50 दिन के जंग में हमारी बटालियन ने हमारे ब्रिगेड के लिए न केवल यालदौर और गनासौर एक्सिस को क्लियर किया, बल्कि यालदौर और गनासौर एक्सिस के दोनों तरफ जो सबसे ज़रूरी 2 पहाड़ियाँ थी, जो कि ब्रिगेड के ऑपरेशंस को आगे नहीं बढ़ने दे रही थी, वो दोनों पहाड़ियाँ 0.5203 और 0.4812 को हमने कैप्चर किया, जिससे कि दुश्मन को एलसी तक खदेड़ा जा सका और ब्रिगेड के आगे के ऑपरेशन सक्सेसफुल हो सके.
Once in Baitalik, this unit moved out into enemy-held territory carrying large amounts of ammunition, but meager rations. The first success of the Jackalai was at 0.5203. An important feature, not only difficult to scale but also very difficult to hold, its top was in line of direct enemy fire from 0.5465.
न केवल पलटन की ही बल्कि पूरे फॉर्मेशन की जो सबसे पहली अहमियत वाली अचीवमेंट थी वो 0.5203 का कैप्चर था. 0.5203 के ऊपर कैप्चर में हमारे कंपनी कमांडर मेजर संजीव दत्त और उनके 2IC कैप्टन अमोल कालिया ने जिस रास्ते को चुना, उस रास्ते पर किसी फौजी के आने की शायद संभावना दुश्मन ने अपने सपने में भी नहीं सोची होगी. और यही कारण था, जब पोस्ट के टॉप पर पहुंच गए तब तक पाकिस्तानीज़ को पता ही नहीं था कि यहाँ पहुँच चुके हैं। पर एक बार जब हमारी टुकड़ी वहाँ पहुँच गई, उसके बाद में पाकिस्तान के लिए मरने मारने वाली बात थी, जबकि कैप्टन अमोल कालिया और उसकी पूरी पार्टी पाकिस्तानी आक्रमण को खदेड़ते हुए इस जंग में शहीद हुए। और जो सर्वाइवर दो नीचे आए हैं, उनके जो बयान है उसके हिसाब से कैप्टन अमोल कालिया पहले अपने पर्सनल वेपन से फायर किया, फिर एलएमजी फायरर के घायल होने पर एलएमजी से फायर किया, और लास्ट में जब एमएमजी फायरर भी दुश्मन की गोली से शहीद हो गया तो उन्होंने खुद एमएमजी फायर करके पाकिस्तान के 6 अटैक करने वालों को मार गिराया। और इस पूरे ऑपरेशन में हमें 16 पाकिस्तानी लाशें मिली, जिससे जाहिर होता है कि कितनी ज़रूरत थी इस पोस्ट को वापस पकड़ने के लिए पाकिस्तानीज़ को।
Now having successfully captured 5203, Balotia's men set their eyes on point 4812. Intricate planning followed in an attempt to take the enemy by surprise. After a final meeting with their CO, the men gathered in an area called the MMG. No medium machine gun, this MMG stood for Masjid Mandir Gurdwara, a combined place of worship for these soldiers of the Jackal who all belong to the Kashmir Valley.
1948 में जब पाकिस्तानी रेडर्स कश्मीर में श्रीनगर की तरफ बढ़ रहे थे, तो शेख अब्दुल्ला के वॉलंटियर्स और लोकल वॉलंटियर्स ने जिन ग्रुप्स में वॉलंटरीली ऑर्गेनाइज होकर इन रेडर्स का मुकाबला किया था, ये रेजिमेंट उन्हीं के न्यूक्लियस से 48 के बाद में खड़ी हुई है। शुरू में इसको जेएंड के मिलिशिया के नाम से जाना जाता था, बाद में इसके बहादुरी के कारनामों को देखते हुए इसको रेगुलर आर्मी बना दिया गया और जम्मू एंड कश्मीर लाइट इन्फेंट्री का नाम दिया गया।
This Kashmiri force, half Muslim and half Hindu and Sikh, are sons of the soil, and their motivation in clearing the intruders from Kashmir is very personal.
This is precisely the reason that Jackal troops have commitment to sort out Pakistanis much more than anybody else.
This religious composition not only stands firmly against Pakistani propaganda, but gives the rest of the country immense amount of hope about Kashmir. It sets shining examples of brotherhood for all of India as these troops fight together and pray together.
ये एक वाकई सीन देखने लायक होता है जब मौलवी, पंडित जी और ग्रंथी अपने अपने धर्म की पूजा कर रहे होते हैं और अपने अपने ऊपर वाले से पलटन की हिफाजत की बातें कर रहे होते हैं। यही कारण है कि किसी भी हमले में जाने से पहले मैं अपने जवानों को बताता हूँ, जिस फौज का रखवाला अल्लाह, ईश्वर और वाहिगुरु हो, उसको कोई बाल बांका नहीं कर सकता। और अपने बार बार के एक्शन से पलटन के जवानों ने इसको प्रूव कर दिखाया है।
The inherent faith this unit had in their motherland was India's most obvious defense against Pakistan's chance of jihad.
जहाँ तक जहाद का सवाल है, हमारी मुतबरक किताब कुरान पाक और हदीस के मुताबिक जहाद इन्हें उसके साथ हुक्म हुआ है फ़ी सबीलिल्लाह, इन्हें अल्लाह की राह में जहाद करना। उस जहाद के लिए तब हुक्म है अगर हमारे मज़हब को किसी भी किस्म का कोई ख़तरा हो। जहाँ तक पाकिस्तान का जहाद के नाम से हमारे